Good afternoon, everyone. Before we get started, could I just please ask to make sure all the microphones are turned off in the chamber? IT, you ready to go? Thank you. Welcome to the County Planning Committee on Wednesday, the 29th of July 2026. I am Councillor Scott Woodhouse, Chair of the committee, and I'm chairing today's meeting. The meeting is being broadcasted live through our YouTube channel, and before we commence with today's formal business, I would like to cover some of the housekeeping issues first to follow. Can I ask everyone to switch off or make silent the mobile phones? Please keep microphones switched off at all times unless invited to speak by the chair, and when invited to speak, please switch on the microphone nearest to you and introduce yourself. We have a number of officers with us this morning who I will now ask to introduce themselves, starting with Amanda.
Amanda Stevenson, Committee Services.
Neil Carter, I'm the solicitor to the committee.
Graham Blakey, Principal Planning Officer.
Callum Harvey, Senior Planning Officer.
Steve France, Senior Planning Officer.
Claire Teasdale, Principal Planning Officer.
Alex Puddick, Senior Active Travel Officer.
Dave Smith, Principal Highways Officer.
John Hughes, Environmental Health.
Tom Betts, Design and Conservation Officer.
Rebecca Beeston, Landscape Officer.
Thank you very much. Moving on to the agenda, do we have any apologies for absence and substitute members?
Yes, Chair, we'll have apologies from Councillor Stevenson, Councillor Potts and Councillor Madison, and we'll have Councillor Teasdale, who was substituting for Councillor Stevenson.
Thank you very much. Councillor Wilkes?
Sorry, did you mention Councillor Freeman then? No, okay.
Do we have any declarations of interest for today? No. Moving on. Minutes of the meeting held on the 8th of July 2026. Can I have a proposer for that, please? Yeah, quick, thank you. Carried? Yeah, agreed, thank you. Moving on to the applications, can I please ask Callum to go on to agenda item 5A? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, members. So the first application on today's agenda is for the erection of 93 dwellings with associated access, infrastructure and landscaping. The site's located to the land to the north of George Pitt Lane on the edge of Great Lumley. So the first slide shows the location of the site in the context of the village. So the red line boundary shows the extent of the application site. This slide shows a more zoomed in image. To the north of the site are residential dwellings, whilst to the south is a tall tree belt and an adjacent hedgerow, with allotments further south. To the west is Cocken Lane, and the site is split by a public footpath which runs north to south through the site at the eastern end of the site. So just flicking through some site photographs. So the members who were on the visit this morning will recognise this viewpoint from when we're looking at from Cocken Lane. To the west of the site, so the proposed access would be coming through the hedgerow just to the left of that telegraph pole. So from this viewpoint, it would be clear that the site would be seen in the context of the existing houses to the north. This next viewpoint shows the site from the northeast corner, and this is from the public footpath looking west back towards Cocken Lane. So the visibility of this site from longer distance viewpoints is a key consideration for this application. So this view is on Cocken Lane to the south on the approach to Great Lumley. So this photograph was taken in winter, and it shows that the application site would not be visible beyond the tree line off in the distance, although officers are mindful that you can see some of the houses on the left hand side. So this slide shows the same view again in the summer, and this is what would have been seen on the minibus this morning, coming up Cocken Lane. So again, in summer, the views of the site are better screened. So turning next to the views from the east, I've tried to use these red arrows and this red line to indicate the extent of the proposed build form. So the site would be seen above the red line and between the two arrows off to the south of the village. And this view again is as you get closer to the site, this is as it's seen from the northeast. So again, the red arrows and the red line indicating the extent of build form in the context of the existing village. So this slide shows a proposed site plan. So the existing houses to the north form the existing edge of Great Lumley. The proposed dwellings will be located to the west of the public footpath, which is a key consideration, and would not be extending any further east of the existing settlement, which again is a key consideration. So this layout to the west of the public footpath helps contain a development from sprawl into a more visually sensitive parcel of land within the wider landscape. The main drainage basin and the underground pumping station would be to the east of the footpath, along with proposed planting to help screen the development. Access into the site would be taken from Cocken Lane to the west, and when seen from Cocken Lane, the extent of the build development would fill the gap between the existing housing to the north and that tree belt to the south. And I think this next image, Chair, is just a 3D visual to give a better understanding of the scale of the development and the scale of the dwellings within the context of the existing settlement. So the proposal would fill in a narrow rectangular field. And again, just to reiterate, the development would not push any further east of the settlement, as seen in the distance there from this view. So in terms of the house types, this slide's taken from the submitted design and access statement, indicating the design and appearance of the dwellings. So the proposal includes a mix of 2, 3, 4 and 5 bedroom dwellings, and the provision of 10 single-storey bungalows across the site is welcomed by officers, as this helps address a county-wide need. So one of the other key considerations on this site, Chair, is the proposed off-site highway works along Cocken Lane. So this is explained in detail in the committee report. So these works include pavement widening, provision of new crossing points, and provision of new footpaths to the west of Cocken Lane, providing a crossing point at Cambridge Drive. So these improvements are designed to ensure the development and these walking points, designed to ensure that these walking points are a more desirable route for occupiers of this development to the nearest facilities and amenities in the village. Officers recommend that these works be secured by condition. And as explained in the officer report, these off-site works would also be subject to technical approval under the Highways Act, which is separate from the planning application process. So in terms of representations, we've received 236 letters of objection from the public, including from the Parish Council. The concerns are set out in full in the report, but just as a quick summary, their primary concerns are highway safety, including the width of footpaths and the highway along Cocken Lane. We've got the visual impacts of the development on the landscape and on the character of the village, impact on the amenity of neighbouring residents to the north, impact on the capacity of the GP surgery and the primary school in the village, and also members of the public highlight that the previous application on this site was refused, then dismissed at appeal, and then there was a subsequent High Court challenge which was unsuccessful. The members of the public are of the firm view that the current application should therefore be refused given this site history. So further to those concerns raised by the public, we've got one further objection from the Campaign to Protect Rural England, who raised concerns relating to sustainability and to the visual impacts of the site within the landscape. So turning to the key consultee responses, the Highways Officer advises that the principle of the development, including the principle of the access arrangement, is acceptable. Concerns are maintained in relation to car parking within the site, and the implications and subsequent harm of this are discussed in the officer report. The landscape officer has also been consulted, and they advise that the proposed development would lead to a moderate major degree of harm, prior to the landscape mitigation becoming established. They advise that once established, this new landscaping would reduce the degree of harm. We've had no objections from any other consultees on the amended scheme. That's before members today, subject to securing conditions and Section 106 financial contributions where appropriate. Another key consultee on this application is the Active Travel Officer, who welcomes the agreed package of off-site measures, which would result in a notable improvement compared to the previous application, which was refused and then dismissed at appeal. Officers recommend these measures are secured by condition. So one of the other concerns raised by the public is the capacity of local schools, the GP surgery and other local infrastructure to accommodate this development. So this is a common theme across the housing sites coming forward at the moment. If members were minded to grant planning permission, officers recommend that a number of financial contributions be sought to mitigate the impacts of the development, and these amounts are set out on the screens. In total, there would be more than £690,000 secured in contributions. And just to highlight, Chair, this is in addition to the off-site footpath improvement works along Cocken Lane and the bus stop improvements along Front Street, and the improvements to the public footpath, which runs along the eastern edge of the village, as these works will be secured separately through conditions. So I think the elephant in the room for this one, Chair, certainly as far as the public are concerned, is what's changed since the previous refusal and the previous appeal. So the main concern which has been raised by the public is this matter, and as a bit of context, the previous application was for 148 dwellings across a larger parcel of land to the northeast of the current site. That previous application was refused by the Planning Committee in 2023, in line with officer recommendation, as officers had recommended refusal due to sustainability and landscape concerns at that time. That refusal was then appealed by the developer, and the appeal was subsequently dismissed in 2024. So worth noting, though, Chair, that the inspector did not consider the landscape harm to be unacceptable. He only maintained concerns with the sustainability of the site. It's also worth noting that the inspector did not raise any highway safety concerns, and this was not a reason for refusal raised by officers at that time. Another thing to take into consideration is that larger development was for 55 more houses, and therefore the current scheme would have a smaller impact on the road network than that previous scheme. So looking first at the sustainability of the site, under the current application, a package of measures have been agreed with the Active Travel Officer. These include the footpath improvements and the bus stop improvements as set out in the report. And as mentioned before, this package goes above and beyond the package offered under the previous application, and this is welcomed by officers. The next change since the last application is that the previous proposal included more houses on the field to the northeast. That parcel of land is more visually sensitive within the landscape, and as mentioned earlier, that larger development would have led to a greater impact on the road network. So by reducing the scale of development, the applicant has reduced the scale of those impacts. But I think the main consideration, Chair, for members today is the change in the housing land supply position. So since October 2025, County Durham has been required by the government to ensure the delivery of 2,011 homes every year. As a result, it has become more difficult for the County Council to refuse planning applications for housing developments. And just to highlight, this was not the case during the previous refusal in 2023, and this was not the case when the previous appeal was considered and determined back in 2024. Back then, the County Council could demonstrate a 6.3-year housing land supply, which was a strong position at that time. So the current requirement for more housing is a significant change. Officers advise we have approximately 4.4-year supply. So just to quickly flick through the harms from the current scheme. As set out in the report, officers feel there would be a transformative landscape visual impact at a local level. Therefore, the site is not considered to be well related to the settlement in a visual sense. This leads to conflict with Policy 6 of the County Durham Plan and further conflict with Policy 10. However, with mitigation, which is proposed within this scheme, these impacts are reduced to minor, moderate level of harm, and this aligns with what the inspector said back in 2024. Another element of harm is loss of agricultural land. So we've got loss of 5.6 hectares of grade 3B agricultural land. This leads to only a very limited degree of harm, given that this land is grade 3B and not best and most versatile as defined by Natural England. There were also concerns raised by the Highways Officer and by the Urban Design Officer regarding the distribution of parking bays. So the amount of parking bays is acceptable, although officers do have some preference on where they're located. This does lead to a red score for design review and subsequent conflict with Policy 29. It's worth noting, though, Chair, this is a design issue, not a highway safety issue. So just to quickly flick through the benefits, the proposal would deliver new housing to address the county's needs, including 14 affordable homes and 10 bungalows. This would also create jobs during the construction period and generate new footfall for local businesses once the houses were occupied. Officers advise these benefits be afforded significant weight in favour of the proposal. The scheme also provides 10% biodiversity net gain. So just to summarise, Chair, in accordance with paragraph 11D of the NPPF, given the absence of a 5-year housing land supply, the identified adverse impacts and the identified conflicts with policies 6, 10 and 29 of the County Durham Plan do not significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits of this proposed development. Officers therefore recommend that members approve this application subject to the completion of a Section 106 legal agreement and subject to the conditions set out within the officer report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Callum. We have a number of speakers to speak on behalf of this application. I would like to start off with local member Phil Heaveside. I can remind you, you do not have a limited time, but please keep it in a reasonable amount. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for allowing me to speak. I ask you today to refuse this application. This application is simply not about whether County Durham needs more homes. It is about whether this is the right place to build them. The officer's own report accepts that this proposal conflicts with the County Durham Plan. Paragraph 5 of the executive summary states that the development would not be well related to the settlement, would extend the urban edge into the open countryside and therefore conflicts with Policy 6. Paragraph 7 goes on to conclude that the scheme scores 2 red building for life assessments, meaning it conflicts with Policy 29. And the report specifically notes that developments with 1 or more red scores should normally be refused unless there are significant overriding reasons. Most importantly, paragraph 9 concludes that the proposal conflicts with the County Durham Plan when read as a whole. And that should be the starting point for the members of this committee. The site has already been tested. The previous application was refused by this council. It was then dismissed by the planning inspector after a full public inquiry. Belware then challenged the decision in the High Court. They lost. The planning inspector's conclusions remain valid and material consideration. The inspector found that this site was not a sustainable location for housing and conflicted with policies 6, 10 and 21 of the County Durham Plan. The High Court confirmed this decision. Members should ask themselves what's fundamentally changed. The answer is very little. The number of houses has reduced, which is reduced in Great Lumley, but it's also reduced the number of access and egress points from the estate, half them. The footpaths have been widened slightly. Some crossings have been added. Some bus shelters are proposed, not new bus stops, just new shelters. But none of the changes alter the fact that this remains open countryside beyond the established settlement edge. The officer's own landscape assessment says exactly that. It states that the development would create an incursion into open countryside, extend the build form of the village and cause major adverse effects locally. It also acknowledges that the development would remain visually harmful for around 10 years until landscape matures. And even after the 10 years, the report concludes there would still be minor to moderate adverse landscape impact. That is permanent changes to Great Lumley. The officer also accepts that the proposal is not well related to the settlement in a visual sense and therefore remains in conflict with Policy 6. So despite all the amendments, one of the principal reasons for refusal still exists. Members should also consider Policy 29. The design review panel awarded 2 red scores. It also awarded a number of amber scores that could possibly be upgraded to red. The report itself reminds members that support and text to Policy 29 says developments with 1 or more red scores will not normally be accepted and will be refused planning permission unless there is significant overriding reasons. If that policy wording is to mean anything, then surely it must be applied consistently. Otherwise, why have it? The report also accepts continuing shortcomings in public transport. The nearest bus stop remains around 600 metres away. The routes remain limited and are still only very limited on a Sunday. The report even notes that current Active Travel England guidance now recommends bus stops should generally be within 400 metres, not the 600 we have here. There are no additional bus services, no increase to frequency of buses, no improved evening or weekend services. If we're asking residents to choose sustainable transport, we need to provide a realistic alternative to the car. A pole on the roadside or a shelter doesn't achieve that. The report also boasts the new stops will get real-time bus information displays. I'm sorry, that's 25-year-old tech. My father's 89 next week and gets all that information and more on his phone. This is all smoke and mirrors. So while mitigation has improved conditions with the crossings, it does not remove the underlying sustainability concern identified by the planning inspector. This isn't a sustainable site. There's another important issue, consistency. Planning decisions must be predictable and based on adopted policy. Residents are entitled to believe that when the planning inspector dismisses an appeal and the High Court upholds that decision, those conclusions carry some genuine weight. If members approve this application despite the acknowledged conflicts with Policy 6 and 29, despite acknowledged landscape harm, and despite the inspector's previous conclusions, it inevitably raises the question of what confidence local communities can have in the planning system. I appreciate the Council currently can't demonstrate a 5-year housing supply. However, a housing shortfall should not automatically override conflict with the development plan. We shouldn't be riding roughshod over communities. The statutory starting point remains that applications should be determined in accordance with the development plan unless material considerations indicate otherwise. Members are perfectly entitled to conclude and acknowledge that landscape harm, the conflict with Policy 6, the conflict with Policy 29 and previous inspectors' findings outweigh the benefits of it in this particular case. To conclude, this application is on unallocated countryside. It extends Great Lumley into the farmland and it conflicts with the County Durham plan. The officer's own report says so. The inspector determined that the site conflicts with Policy 6, 10 and 21, but this application still doesn't demonstrate the fundamental sustainability concerns have been overcome. For those reasons, I respectfully ask members to refuse this application and uphold the policies that this Council itself has adopted. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. I'd like to invite up to speak next to local resident Margaret Juniper. Can I please remind you, you've got 5 minutes time for your speech. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Margaret and I'm here representing quite a large group of residents who are opposed to this plan. Phil has very kindly identified why we're very concerned about this plan and why we're so disappointed to be here after the development was refused unanimously by this council 3 years ago and then at appeal. He's very articulately explained how it doesn't fit with the county plan and that there are 2 red flags which would normally mean that this development should not go ahead. But in reading the report, it would seem that the pressure for numbers of houses is the key feature that is going to try and push this through. Now, in reading the National Planning Framework, which has been revised, it does indicate that developers possibly could push new housing developments through, but it is sustainable developments, not any developments. And one of the key points about Great Lumley is it's not isolated, but it is a very distinct village, and we have very few employment opportunities. So key areas of employment for the people that live here are places like Durham and Newcastle, Sunderland, and even further afield. So we are a village of commuters. We commute to work, we commute to shopping centres, we commute for leisure, and so we use cars. Phil has very clearly explained that the bus service is very limited. It's very limited, and it's beyond walking distances. The big thing is the routes and the destinations. And I did my bit of research, and to get to any of the major centres for leisure, shopping and employment often involves 2 or even 3 buses when they're there, and the journey time, when you add in walking to and from the bus stops, can be 2 or 3 times more than using a car. Now, when you've got a choice and you're trying to get to work, people are going to use a car. And there are 93 more homes and possibly 180 cars proposed in this development, and they are going to come out onto Cocken Lane, and most will travel into Great Lumley, so adding to the problems within Great Lumley. A suggestion for sustainability is also cycling. Now, we do have people within our group who are cyclists. They tell me essentially that's completely unrealistic. The roads around Great Lumley are narrow, busy country roads, and there's a steep hill to Chesley Street, so it's very unattractive as a commuting option. The few people that do cycle to Chesley Street use the footpath for their safety, but as you know, that's illegal. We've heard that all about the position of this particular development. It does feel like an add-on to the southeast corner of the village, and the walking distances to amenities are listed. However, one of the walking distances I noted was missing was that to the infant school, and that is considerably more than 800 metres from the centre of this development. And since it will be the youngest children that are trying to get to school, this will be a considerable challenge. The list also seems to underplay the small parade of shops at the western end of the village. This actually includes a co-op, a post office and a cafe, which are extremely well used. And as residents, we know these amenities are extensively used by car users. There are very few people
1 minute remaining
that walk or cycle. Cocken Lane is the biggest concern. There are proposed new developments, and unfortunately it is school summer holidays, so the only photographs can give you an idea how difficult it will be with narrower roads and the congestion caused by cars around the school. We also have the loss of habitat and arable farming, and our developers would like to mitigate against those. They have already apparently done so in an earlier development in Great Lumley, but the residents there consider the landscaping falls considerably short of their expectations and promises 5 years after completion. Therefore, we're concerned that once built, this habitat will be lost. As residents, we will live with the consequences of the decisions made today. The revised development does not meet the needs of sustainability. Therefore, it should not be approved, and any new housing should be done within the county plan.
Thank you, Margaret. Can I please invite Amy Lynchfield to speak on behalf of Bellway Homes? But can I please remind you have 5 minutes as well?
Good afternoon, Chair and members, and thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Amy Litchfield, and I am a senior planner at Litchfields, acting as the agent on behalf of the applicant Bellway Homes North East. Firstly, I would like to thank officers for their collaborative and proactive approach, which has helped deliver the scheme before you with a recommendation for approval. As you all know, the site has planning history. However, the proposals today represent a significantly different scheme to that previously considered by this committee and the Planning Inspectorate. I have seen firsthand the amount of effort that has gone into revising this application from both the applicant and officers. I therefore speak to the scheme on its own merits. The application would deliver 93 high-quality dwellings, including 14 affordable homes and 10 bungalows, at a time when housing delivery carries heightened weight in the planning balance. The Council's current inability to demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply means that significant weight should be given to the delivery of market and affordable housing on this site. The applicant has embraced the Council's pre-application service and enhanced design review process before the application was submitted. This has been a positive experience, and it's genuinely helped get the proposal to where it is now with a positive officer recommendation. The site presents an opportunity to strengthen the gateway into Great Lumley with thoughtful landscaping and welcoming street scenes delivered by a 5-star house builder. As you have heard from the case officer, there are 2 outstanding red scores from the last design review panel. These relate to the distribution of visitor parking and the distance to bus stops on Front Street. The scheme as designed is compliant on the number of visitor parking spaces required to serve a development of this size. The red score is as a result of their distribution. Visitor parking bays are just one design consideration, and they have been distributed in a way to avoid parking-dominated street scenes, particularly to the north. All houses also have the required in-curtilage parking provision. The nearest bus stops are around 600 metres from the centre of the site, which has been scored red as it exceeds the Council's 400-metre guidance. However, the attractiveness of the routes to the bus stop should also be taken into consideration, of which the applicant is proposing amendments to Cocken Lane and a wider wayfinding strategy for the area of this village. The development will also improve the existing bus stops through the provision of level boarding facilities and real-time information boards. This benefits both new and existing residents and will increase the patronage for the existing bus service. The scheme also brings with it a number of benefits to the local community. There is a package of off-site highways works which will help reduce vehicle speeds along Cocken Lane, particularly near the junior school, improve active travel links to Front Street and upgrade the adjacent public right-of-way. These works have been put through a Stage 1 road safety audit to the satisfaction of the Council's Highways Department. These measures are all in addition to those secured by the travel plan. The applicant's transport consultant is here today and would be happy to answer any questions or points of clarification on this. The applicant has also committed to securing all of the requested planning obligations and financial contributions asked of them. There are no outstanding objections for the applicant to address from the Council's consultees, including active travel and highways. This is a deliverable scheme. If approved today, work could commence on site as early as September. With a projected build-out rate of around 35 dwellings per annum, this scheme would begin delivering new homes quickly and make a tangible contribution to housing delivery in the short term, with the development estimated to be fully occupied within 5 years. Approving this scheme today is not only about delivering much-needed quality homes. This development represents an investment in the local economy, helping to sustain jobs and provide opportunities for businesses based in the area. At a time when the Council is seeking to strengthen its housing land supply position, applications that are both deliverable and capable of being implemented quickly should be afforded significant weight. This scheme is one such opportunity, and we would invite members to approve this application in line with your office's recommendations. We'd be happy to answer any further questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. Can I please ask the general public, when people are speaking, please refrain from interrupting them. Thank you very much. Cal, is there anything you'd like to come back with that?
Yeah, Chair, thanks. So I think there's been a lot of apologies. I think there's been a lot of interesting points raised by Councillor Heaviside and by Ms Juniper. And I recognise the strength of feeling amongst local residents, so I was there at the public consultation event a few months back with Graham and with our team manager. But I think, just to highlight, Chair, and it's to really reiterate that we are currently in a tilted balance as a county. The government has massively increased the housing requirement at this local authority. Given the wording of paragraph 11D of the framework, shall get back on the board just for ease of reference, it becomes very, very difficult to refuse new housing sites. So as set out in the officer report, there are some policy conflicts, there are some harms as a result of that, but it does make it very difficult to sustain those issues as reasons for refusal through the appeal process. Just to come back on a couple of particular points, so to say once again, following the package of active travel measures being agreed with the active travel team, officers are of the view that the site is a sustainable location for development. And in respect of loss of habitat, the ecology officer has no concerns. Mitigation measures will be secured through conditions and through the Section 106 agreement. I also recognise as well the point that housing sites should come through the local plan. I'm aware that my colleagues in the policy team are currently preparing a new plan, but in the meantime, the tilted balance does apply. And to say once again, it makes it more difficult to resist housing sites. Hope that helps, Chair. Any queries? Happy to help.
Thank you, Callum. I'd like to open it up for questions from the members now. Councillor Wilkes.
Could the officer just put up the picture that has the red line boundary on? I don't know if that was the one I wanted to... Yeah, so to the left of Cocken Road, you've got another field. I think it's a playing field, actually, and then there's another field further on. If this planning application was passed, that would then mean that the boundary for the village would be moving further to the south. We've currently got in for 850 pieces of land for development as part of the County Durham plan, and one of those is that piece of land on the other side of the road, running all the way across along. And I don't know, I'll ask the local member the name of that street that runs around the outside. Cambridge Drive. So if we agree to extend the boundary line of this village southwards, I would ask the officer, does that then mean that it's more likely that the outline of the boundary of the village is then further south, and that other sites on the other side of that road would then be more likely to be passed?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, Chair. In my personal view, the answer would be no. The reason being... So in my personal view, the answer to that would be no. It would be more difficult to support housing to the west of Cocken Lane. The reason being that those parcels of land are more visually sensitive within the landscape. So part of the reason why I'm recommending approval today is because of the tree belt and the well-established hedgerow to the south of this particular parcel of land. So I'll just jump to the end. Please don't interrupt. Please don't interrupt. I'm trying to explain the proposal to the members. So the tree belt to the south does act as a strong visual barrier. It's part of the reason why I'm recommending approval for this scheme. Adjacent land to the west of Cocken Lane does not benefit from that tree belt.
Thanks for that, Chair. I remain concerned because there is another line of hedgerow running along the other side, and we would be extending the boundary of that village, which would then put that other part of Lumley at risk, which I believe has the Weardale Way running through it as well, which is very important to this county.
Just to further clarify on the comments of Callum with respect to that, the public open space to the west of the site across the road, that's designated as play space within our open space needs assessment. Various different typologies in respect to the different parts of it. Ultimately, on the plan before you, it's the dark green, to the extent of the dark green field immediately to the west. To build on that, you'd have to overcome that designation, so that is by no means a foregone conclusion. So it has an element of protection, which sadly, as an agricultural field, the application site does not benefit from. Thank you, Chair.
Can I just remind the public, I've already asked you just shortly, do not interrupt when people are speaking, and that behaviour is not acceptable in this chamber, so please refrain from interrupting people when they're talking. Thank you. Councillor Bell.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I've got 4 questions for 4 departments, if that's okay. But just to quickly add on, just add some information on the back of Councillor Wilkes' question there, because that was discussed on the site visit about the extent, if this was extended, that other site would become, you know, in good work by Councillor Wilkes, it is in that plan, it's a possibility it could come forward. But the parish council actually leased that field, and it's only on a 12-month rolling lease, so the parish council got no control of it. And the same landowner who has the red today's side owns that field opposite and the one below that. And although it is a football called the old football field, possibility as long as to please support England, that football field could be moved south again into the next field. Anyhow, so my 4 questions is, Chair, is the first one. Shall I give my 4 questions, or do you want us to go and come back?
Just do all 4 at the same time, mate. Cheers, Councillor.
So the first one is for the applicant for Bellway. why, I just can't understand is why, sitting on this committee so long, a big part of the process is to always do consultation with your village or wherever, your towns, wherever it might be. No consultation has happened with the village. And then to bring sort of, you know, for an application for nearly 100 houses, probably up to 400 people, ever how many car journeys in a village, that affects village life enormously. And not to consult with the village. I know it's not mandatory, it's not a compulsory, it's a planning sort of need, what have you, but it's a big red flag not to go out to the village and ask that question. The second question is for the landscape officer. In the report, it highlights it's minor to major harm, which, you know, whatever the planting scheme is, as we all know, that takes 10 to 15 years to come through to screen any new proposed sort of properties on there. I just want to sort of clarify, is that an objection from the landscape officer? Because it didn't actually say the word objection in there. The third question is to the highways officer, for Dave Smith. When we were on site this morning, it was clear that that path, sort of, you know, if it's more than one person walking on the path, the committee, we had to, each time somebody was walking down with wheelbarrows, with dogs, to let them by, you had to go onto the road. And Councillor Schumann, he was closer, like a Mercedes coming up behind him. Fortunately, it had to sort of go over the other side of the road. But what's proposed in the widening of that path? Because I believe it should be 1.8 metres, and I just can't see how that can be achieved on that path. That was a really big one, and that was also a big concern in the original application. And the last question is, and it's probably yourself, Callum, because I don't know if we spoke about anybody from education being here, but I didn't hear anybody from education being present. The question is for secondary school places. So there's a 106 agreement to give £90,000 for them, you know, for the additional places which is created in the secondary schools. Unfortunately, the feeder schools from Lumley is Hermitage and Parkview. They are both academies, and they're both, which we've seen for many, many years previously, when this application comes forward, the developers give the money, but the academies, it's down to them whether they take the money and give the extra places. What has been proven for probably the last 6 years, they haven't taken the money. That money's sitting in a pot in Chester, in County Hall, what have you, and it's just building and building. And when it comes to September, and myself and Councillor Heaviside, you know, our phones just go like daft in relation to when children can't get into the school places at Parkview and Hermitage, and now we find like school children having to go over the board into Sunderland, into Horton, up to Stanley, and this application will just make things a lot worse in relation to you know, approval will create lots more places needed. So I'm my 4 questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Bell. Can I just ask Amy, would you like to speak on behalf about the consultation, please?
Yeah, no problem, and thank you, Councillor Bell, for the question. The applicant did do extensive consultation through the last application that carried through to the appeal decision as well. We did do pre-application with the council's officers at that stage. Given the red line boundary and the smaller scheme, it was agreed that it would not be a validation requirement for this application, although all residents were consulted through the council's own consultation process.
Thank you, Amy, but I think 4 years ago is not recent either.
Can I ask the landscape officer, do you want to return about the harm to the minor major landscape?
I think I'll come in on landscape. Unfortunately, while Rebecca is here in a landscape capacity, this case is not hers. So we couldn't get David to the meeting for this case, but I think it's an issue in terms of minor, moderate and severe harm that we as officers and you as members of the planning committee will have to grapple with on every application you deal with in the open countryside. I can cast my mind back over numerous applications before this committee that several of you are involved with. I think what the report sets out is a view from the council officers where in the short term that's at the higher end of the scale, at moderate to severe. What the inspector concluded in his decision back in 2024 was it was at the lower end of the scale in terms of minor to moderate. Words, language, I'm trying to use a sort of sliding scale here, but what we did in terms of making our assessment is we looked at that from the middle ground and went, it's moderate, it's in the middle, that's what we as professional officers consider, given all the evidence that's available to us, which, given the appeal decision, is more than what we had when we put forward our recommendation originally. What I think it's up to yourselves as members of the committee is to look at that, use your judgment, decide whether you feel that which one of those three you relate to, and from there attribute the weight to that in the planning balance, which I'm happy to discuss later on. But that's ultimately where that is, and I think we've got to do that in terms of planning experts, and that's what we've done in terms of the recommendation. So hopefully that helps in your assessment on that particular matter. Thank you.
David, do you want to come in about the paths, please?
Yeah, just to answer Councillor Bell's questions about the footpath. Yeah, obviously those works can be executed within the adopted highway. The developer has already done topographical surveys. They were in the original planning application in 2022, which the planning inspector's already reviewed. We did change surveys along that route, and we'd obviously check those with the definitive highway maps, so effectively the footpath can be widened to 1.5 metres. Now, obviously, the standard, as you know, Alan's 1.8, but in rural areas where there's less pedestrian traffic, 1.5 is sufficient in terms of manual streets. So, obviously, while it's not ideal, we know that the short lengths of 1.5 footpath, which can be accommodated through those 278 works, and we don't feel that was a severe enough a reason to refuse the application. It wouldn't have stood the test of the plan appeal. Because obviously the planning inspector would just said, like, obviously there's going to be light levels of pedestrian, obviously traffic along that route. So yes, it can be carried out within the 278 procedures. Thanks, Chair.
Yeah, thank you. Just a comment, Chair, just on that. Yeah, 1.5, David, I respect you as in your professional opinion there. But obviously the 1.5, and we've seen this morning, there's a I don't know, probably 100 allotments sort of south of the entrance to where this site is proposed. So there's a lot of people sort of walk backwards and forwards in this morning. There was like wheelbarrows, people walking dogs, anything. So it's probably more of a case, more than ever, it needs to be 1.8. And I think also to add to that, the narrow width, I don't think we've got the standard width on the road anyway. So it's not as though the cars can move across without going into the other sort of carriageway approaching traffic there, which we've seen this morning, they ended up on the other side of the road. Yeah, but yeah, thank you all the same.
Yes, and finally, just on the education, because I'm conscious we don't have an expert there. However, sadly, we get into the education monies and things a lot on applications and things. So there's two parts to that. The first part of that is our policy requirements to mitigate impacts from development, and I think we have an SPD on financial contributions that goes into great detail on that, and the sums of money involved mean that we as officers end up going into that in great detail as well. I think the first part of that is an identified shortfall in capacity, hence the need to secure a financial contribution in line with that SPD. I think that bit's a bit easy. That's the easy bit. After that, we get the money in down the line, and then it should get drawn down by the schools to increase the capacity, because as local education authority, they would have more children from this development that we then would have to find a school for. The issue, I think, then lies in the system that's related around the schools in terms of academy trusts. They're independent from the local authority, and I think beyond that, that's all I can really say. I think how that all works is beyond, I think, the remit of this committee. I think the question would have to be, if we do not secure the money, what would happen in terms of that capacity and where that issue would then fall, and who would ultimately pay for that. So, thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that, Graham, but it is broken at the end of the day, and sort of just keep building and building, and us as an authority not having the answer really isn't good enough. Thank you.
Councillor Wilkes.
Just want to understand, so the inspector previously in the High Court, the landscaping issues with this site were pretty much put to one side, and the issue was with sustainability and the location itself. So the only difference that I can see now between back then and now, putting aside the fact there's a few, not quite as many houses, is the fact that we don't have at this moment in time, the 5-year land supply, although we are getting close to it, 4 point something, and we've got 850 sites have just been submitted for housing. So in the next 12 months, we're probably going to have a whole raft more sites coming forward. But just so I'm clear, when we're looking at this now, it was very clear in the High Court, it was very clear by the inspector, it's not a sustainable site, it's not a sustainable location. So we're really being told that the only real difference that we have to consider now is that land supply issue.
Yep, Chair. So there's two elements to that. The first one is that this is a smaller site located to the centre of the village. So the distance from the centre of the development is a key consideration. So the actual walking distances to the nearest bus stops and to the nearest shops and primary school and all the rest are actually closer than under the previous application. The second element to that is that the applicants came in, worked with the Aqua Travel team. We have an improved package of measures. We feel that that does address the inspector's concerns, particularly in relation to bus stops. So taking those elements into consideration, plus the outstanding housing need as well,
Just to be clear though, it's still the same field, it's just that the sud system's in a gap at the other end, and it's still way more than 400 metres to the nearest bus stop. It's 600, was it? 600. Yeah, okay.
I think just to pick up on that difference between that, I think the language was used in one of the representations that was made before about significant overriding reasons. I think that was related to design. I think the way the MPPF's floated is the conflicts which Councillor Heaviside did identify and which the report identifies kicks us into this, what we planners term the tilted balance. And the government, with the way it's phrased, has us with in effect exactly the same site, proposing more houses on this particular part of the site than it did originally, addressing some of the matters from the appeal decision. You know, the distances is a real technical matter that was discussed at the inquiry at length, but bringing that closer to as an improvement does leave us with, on the ground, will be the same site from the same junction on Cochrane Road. And I think that's the bit, members, yes, we will say that. If you build in a field, you will turn it from a field to a housing development. And I think the issues that we've got is actually with the work that's been done to bring some of the benefits closer, do some more work in respect to distances, bus stops, look at some of those things, whilst the bus stops still are further away than 400 metres. The bar, i.e. that we have to pass, is a lot lower because of this tilted balance and the significant benefit that then is implied for delivery of housing. So professionally, we have to adjust our view on that, and that is ultimately why that recommendation from us has changed in that period. So hopefully that helps give you an idea of why we're here with our recommendation at the least. So no, you're not going mad, Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. It's just to emphasise what the planning officer said about that change in the policy landscape. So, you know, since members previously determined the previous application and the previous appeal decision, paragraph 11D has been engaged, so that is quite a significant change because it creates a presumption in favour. So what it's saying is that members ought to be starting from the proposition that planning permission ought to be granted unless the harms significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits. So that is quite a key change, and that is the policy landscape that we're in now, and that is the test that will have to be applied by members.
I think we're ready to move the application on for debate. Yeah, go on, no.
Thank you, Chair. It's just to say I see that Councillor Freeman did come in quite late. He has missed the officer's presentation and the speakers, so I assume in those circumstances that he won't be taking part in the decision.
Thank you, Neil. Yeah. Councillor Bell.
Are we open for debate or still questions?
Yeah, up to debate.
Debate?
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I think, obviously, like Councillor Heaviside and residents have literally covered everything in here. And the big question is, and like what, you know, this application site was refused previously by the case officer, by this committee, by the parish council, by the inspectorate, and then the highest court and the King's Council refused it. and everybody said it wasn't a Policy 6 site, it wasn't a sustainable location. And I'm going to do so very often, I'll disagree with our legal officer and other professionals in here as regarding significant change. For me, as regarding adding a crossing, updating a couple of bus shelters, nothing's changed. The site location hasn't changed. There's no significant change. And for this reason, it still remains sort of not a compliant Policy 6 site. As a local authority, I think we've seen this like week in, week out, applications coming forward here. I think in our division, we've got we surround with 4 big applications. And this is during the period when the Durham plan's being pulled together. You know, so rather than all the developers waiting to have the sites allocated and Durham sitting there and saying we haven't got a 5-year supply, it's open season for these developers coming forward. And the government is just literally putting pressure on the local authorities, taking away the democracy in relation to the elected members in this chamber who represent the residents in their divisions to come in here and have a voice. And at the end of the day, we've got to be stand up and be counted and not be backing down to sort of say, you know, the government want 3 million houses within the next 3 years, because that's not going to happen. They've already sort of admitted it's not going to happen. They're going to back down on them numbers. And for that reason, it's not a Policy Compliance 6. And things are no better, it's no different. And I move refusal on this application. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Schumann.
Councillor Eales.
Moving away from the site, I am worried about the access to the site. The road that gives access to the site is very, very narrow. We drove up it this morning, and the minibus transit had to move over for oncoming traffic. Now, what is going to happen when the site is, if it's approved and construction starts, what's going to happen to the construction traffic? Where are people going to go with HGVs, tippers, and things like that on site?
Councillor Eales.
I would just like to say I support what Councillor Bells just said.
Councillor Wilkes.
So, I agree with what Councillor Bells said. We're clearly looking at exactly the same as was there before. The only thing we're being told is that there's not as many houses currently passed. There's actually over 13,000 houses passed to be built in this county. I just wish developers wouldn't keep land banking them and not actually building them and then putting pressure on everywhere else. Well, the reality is that we've got a County Durham plan process. This site's currently submitted. Our officers are going through all those sites. If they determine that it's appropriate, we'll see it again. If they don't, it'll be kicked out. I'm perfectly happy to kick this out based on the fact that now it's really changed and on the same policy basis as was upheld in the High Court, which I actually think wasn't just Policy 6, I think it was Policies 10 and 21. Not so sure about the 2 red scores, but we've heard from Councillor Heaviside, you know, we're supposed to consider red scores if there's 2 or more, and then there's a whole raft of other reasons to turn something down as well, because it's inappropriate, then I would suggest that we consider Policy 29 being put in here as well. So I'm fully happy to support Councillor Bell's proposal if it was a proposal to refuse, and Councillor Eales seconding it.
Chair, I don't think it's correct to say that nothing's changed in terms of this application. Without labouring the point, we're in a different national policy context. The site's smaller, there's less houses, and there's a package of sustainable travel/transport measures that are being put forward by the applicant and accepted by the professional officers. Having said that, clearly there's an appetite for refusal. I think what I'm hearing is that the members take the view that the harm in planning terms that's been identified by the case officer in his report significantly outweighs the benefits. So it's a balance, and if members you know, wish to take a different view of the overall planning balance, that's something that they're entitled to do.
On that note, I think we're ready for a vote. The vote will be to go with Councillor Bell's recommendation of going against the officer's decision. Can I have all in favours of that? Yeah.
Just to be clear, based on the 4 policies that are raised rather than just policy 6, which Councillor Bell raised, is that correct?
6, 10, 21 and 29, Neil, if that's appropriate to drop in.
Yes, fine. So can I have all in favour to go against officer's recommendation, please? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's unanimous. So that is gone against officer's recommendation, and thank you very much on that one. Thank you. To the second item, agenda number 5B, I'd like to present the presenting officer, Steve France, to present this application.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, councillors, ladies and gentlemen. We have an application here for the installation and operation of a wind turbine generator of up to 125 metres in height. The up to is just a little bit of variable to allow for foundations and the like. With a rotor diameter of about 85 metres at Amazon, the Amazon factory you'll know at Bowburn at junction 61 of the A1M. You can see from the two images on the screen there, the large Amazon factory in the middle of the image, and we've got some better photographs of this, but around there, the A1M to the right, to the east, and the A688 immediately to the east of the Amazon factory. You can see the arrow below the factory unit there, which or the distribution unit, which identifies the proposed position of the wind turbine. And some of the surrounding settlements, you can see the edge of Bowburn, traditionally at the top. There's obviously residential development, which I'll show on some of the other slides, above the Amazon in the Integra 61 development. You can see Tursdale, immediately south of the Amazon factory on the other side of the A688. And some of the north elements of Coxo, the Park Hill estate, on the far right of the image there. You can see the area surrounding the site is farmland for the most part, albeit there's a caveat to that from some recent approvals, which I'll touch on. And you can see the industrial estate, which is on the site of the old Tursdale Colliery, immediately south of the Amazon factory there. As a closer image, and showing a lot of the constraints on the site there, if I work across the site from the left-hand side, the curved line on the far western side of the image is the East Coast Main Line. Between that and the Leamside line, which you see runs diagonally across, is the recently approved Integra 61 Phase 2 development, which is shown as farmland there, and you can see the beck wandering through that. Again, broadly central in the image there is the Amazon factory itself. You can see it there with some of the solar panels that's already been approved, implemented on the roof, with its car parking areas to the right of that. Immediately to the southwest of that, the industrial estate, the traditional industrial estate based on the colliery, and at the bottom of the screen there, Tursdale, the remaining terrace that was associated with the colliery, and a schoolhouse and a school building there, which have been converted into residential accommodation. They've been identified through the consultation exercise and through the assessments of one of the residential receptors of the scheme. The A1M, you can see, is the yellow image, which cuts across the right-hand side of the screen, and between the A688 and the A1M, and I'll point to it on the right-hand screen here, is Cornforth Moor Farm Cottage, which you'll see from the report is one of the receptors that's been identified as a significant issue in the determination of the application. To the top of the screen, you can see some of the residential elements of the Integra 61 development, which have listed objections as well. And again, Park Hill Estate on the other side of the A1M. You can see outside the residential and industrial areas, the parkland setting, sorry, not parkland setting, the parklands further across, the countryside setting, largely arable. The factory, the Amazon factory, is 23 metres in height. If you take the plant that's on the roof as well, it's 25 metres height. So to help you scale what's proposed here, it's a single wind turbine, which will be in the area of the arrows, which is proposed for 125 metres in height, so 5 times the height of the factory. These are distant views, showing the views across from, at the top left, the road up to Thinford, looking back across at the limestone escarpment. From the top right, it's the road that dips down the bottom of Het towards Het Mill, and across one of the farmhouse receptors there's the farm track. Bottom left image is shown across the A688, where the wind turbine, if approved, would appear behind the factory. And then at bottom right, there's an image showing effectively the service yard that the wind turbine is proposed on the edge of, and where the setting out, the erection of the turbine would be proposed. I have 3 images in terms of the principal effects that have led to a refusal on this, and as you'll be aware, a refusal on sustainable development is fairly rare for us, sustainable energy development. As I mentioned and as I pointed out, Cornforth Moor Farm Cottage is a small cottage adjacent to the farmhouse. The farmhouse sits beside it and faces north-south and is effectively screened from views of the wind turbine by this cottage. The cottage effectively has a principal single front elevation within which all the principal windows are. The back of the property looks into the courtyard of the farm. So both the farm cottage windows and the gardens of it face directly across towards the wind turbine, across some farmland and across the 688, but not nonetheless directly towards it. So on the left-hand side, you can see the large image of where the turbine's proposed, and the three images on the right are the mock-ups from the applicant's residential assessment of how this would affect the residents. You can see from those pictures, and I think acknowledged by the resident on my site visit, that actually the factory, despite being a monolith and a huge factory, does manage to be very recessive in terms of its colouring and doesn't have an overbearing effect on the cottage itself. However, for two reasons: one, in terms of its position and the cottage being directly angled towards it, and two, because effectively this is a kinetic structure, it moves, it'll catch the eye. This will have an overbearing effect in terms of officers' appreciation of what's proposed. One of the more contentious elements as well is the residential effect on Tersdale. As I said, one of the colliery terraces that served the old pit. The older of the two terraces was removed, disappearing from the Ordnance Survey Plan in the 1969 edition. And this is the relationship whereby it is acknowledged there is an effect on the village. But in terms of its direct relationship towards it, the image at the top left shows the view towards the village from the turbine. So effectively, the gable end of number 48 of the end of the terrace is facing towards it with no windows in it. The two windows that do face towards it are a window on the offshot at the back, you can see at the right-hand side of that image, and an upstairs window on the schoolhouse, you can see towards the left of the image, the schoolhouse being further down the street with the old converted schoolhouse behind it. The reverse view is bottom left, looking along the street towards where the turbine would be, and then the two images on the right are of where the turbine would appear when viewed from the exit from the cul-de-sac, which is Tersdale, onto the A688. You can see from the bottom left image that the effect looking out from those windows is effectively towards the A1M. And whilst you would see it from the gardens, if you look left, there will be an effect, but in terms of that level of overbearingness, which is the policy requirement, officers are not convinced that that could be maintained as a refusal reason. The other refusal reason is effectively two reasons in two parts. These are again images from the applicant's own submission. I'm afraid the text on them is a little small for the images. However, this shows the visibility of the wind turbine from different parts of the World Heritage Site. Now, what will happen, and a memorable phrase I think used by the landscape officer, was that the turbine blades will look like jazz hands on the horizon behind the cathedral. And you can see from where the cathedral is planted by the blue lines on some of those images that is actually between the towers when viewed from some viewpoints. The viewpoints there including from Wharton Park, the Way sculpture that's in there from the Battery, and from Beacon Hill. These are aspects of the cathedral which are set out in the assessments our conservation and landscape officers use when working out the effect on both the World Heritage Site and the effect on the city centre conservation area. City centre conservation area, as you'll know, is set in two bowls, an inner and an outer bowl. And for the most part, when viewed from the north, looking south in this direction, those views are uninterrupted in terms of skyline development by modern development. You know, you get the tree bank. One of the reasons that this application has taken longer to determine than hoped was because we wanted the applicant to go through a winter assessment of that tree line. Obviously, there's a greater effect potentially over there. And the effect is that the wind turbine, the upper blades and perhaps the gearbox will be able to be viewed in the backdrop of the cathedral. The cathedral, in terms of the planning balance, is one of the highest levels of heritage asset we have. Obviously, it's a World Heritage Site, it's a Scheduled Ancient Monument, it's a Grade 1 listed building, and it's the sort of thing which, in terms of the planning balance, which we use to weigh against the undeniable harms of sustainable energy, has got to be significant in this instance. I'm sure you know what a wind turbine looks like, but that's the proposal there. You can see, like I said, up to 125 metres in height with a rotor diameter of 82 metres. The slight variable for the siting on the land itself. In terms of the actual footprint itself, you can see from the right-hand image that it's very small, and that affects the on-ground biodiversity impacts. In terms of the scale of this, and you might have to squint, but there is an access door at the bottom of the tower there, which shows quite how large this thing potentially is. As I said about the service yard before, the turbine, which is shown in the bottom part of the screen there, there's some laying out areas which can be accomplished if the application is approved and the unit is built on site. Obviously, it comes in large sections, is assembled there. And you can see the applicant's service yard are more than capable of accomplishing that. There's a lot of words on the screen there, and I'm not going to read them all out for you. You've got a very long and detailed report. Having said that in terms of a lot of the principal statutory consultees, including Teesside International Airport, Network Rail for the potential for topple distance on the Leamside line, National Highways for their responsibilities for the A688 and the A1, the Met Office for their weather radar at High Moorsley. No objections being raised from those and the Ministry of Defence. The height of the tower is such that it has the potential, if not mitigated, to affect defence radars, and it's in a low flying zone for the Ministry of Defence. But all of those consultees have come back and said that they would be comfortable with this, subject to conditions. The internal consultees, likewise, the majority have come back without objection. The objection being the exception being conservation and landscape officers. They object with overlapping objections to the harm to the World Heritage Site, the views of the World Heritage Site, and the city centre conservation area. And it's fair to say from the report the comments of the landscape officer extend beyond that, with identified harms to surrounding landscapes in terms of areas of high landscape value as well. There's a lot of those, and from at different levels. Those are listed at length in your report. From the public consultation exercise, there have been objections from the parish councils at Cassop cum Quarrington, Croxdale and Het, with scale, topple distance, to the effect on dwellings, the effect on the A189, which I think was a typo, the operation of Fishburn Airfield, the timing of survey work, an adverse effect on the character of a conservation area. That was from the one from Het Parish Council, have all been set out as objections. In the 157 objections detailing the public's response to the scheme, visual impact, residential amenity concerns, noise, shadow flicker, planning policy conflicts, wildlife and ecology, a lack of consultation, heritage effects, a lack of community benefit, road safety and assessment flaws, and along with animal welfare flaws from the concerns from the dog unit that was a subject of a discussion at a recent application at Coxo, have all been offered. It's got to say, and it says in the report, that there has been other consultation exercises with varying degrees of accuracy sent around surrounding villages. So I'm afraid we can't tell exactly how this relates to the accuracy of the application. There is misinformation being put out there, and that has clouded things and muddied the water for officers in terms of being able to tell you exactly what the public response is, because there is misinformation in there. That's set out in your report. There are 7 representations supporting the principle of renewable energy, although those are usually caveated for the specific effects of this, and with 1 letter wholly in support. Sorry, mind of its own. Policy 34 is the relevant policy for dealing with wind turbines, and it's largely up to date in terms of the relevant policy, and the principle of development is acceptable. The assessment is required against the specific policy areas, and landscape harm, heritage, the residential amenity, quality, animal amenity, and the radar communications, ecology and BNG and the conflicts with the neighbourhood plan potentially, along with the topple distances, are all set out in detail in your report. The recommendation, sorry, this is sticking today, the recommendation has given significant weights, as we have to the benefits of the creation of sustainable energy. There's a discussion in the report that this is acknowledged as for an individual commercial firm. Notwithstanding that, it does take capacity away from the grid, and it does it in a sustainable way. But those usual public benefits that are of significant weight are slightly reduced on the basis of that. A number of harms have been mitigated through conditions, and there are a number of judgments in the report in terms of whether some of the harms identified, such as for residential amenity in the wider environment, could be sustained at appeal or not. And our conclusion is that on the balance, the planning balance, that they could not. 4 refusal reasons have, however, been identified, and that includes, as I say, the overlapping concerns for heritage, which are the harm to the outstanding universal values to the World Heritage Site from visually important and prominent views, the parallel harms to the conservation area, which relies obviously on the World Heritage Site at its core as its setting for a lot of its layout and justifications, the overbearing effect on the residential property at Cornforth Moor Farm Cottage, which I've set out, and also the topple distance onto the A688. The policy requires that the wind turbine, in the event of a catastrophic base failure, should be able to fall over with a bounce of about 10% and not hit any strategic transport route. The rail people at Network Rail have confirmed that they have no concerns for the potential for the Leamside line. It's far enough away from their asset. However, it does overlap on the A688, and that is offered as a refusal reason as well. I'll leave, as ever, the image of the site on the screen for you. If you'd like to return to anything during your debate, please don't hesitate to ask. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Steve. We have a number of speakers, and I'd like to invite Councillor Gary Hutchison, a ward member, to speak first. Please remind you have unlimited time, but please keep it a reasonable amount. Thank you.
Chair, thank you for allowing me to speak today. Before I begin, I'd just like to apologise if I sound a little bit croaky. Unfortunately, I'm currently suffering with a nose and a throat infection, but I felt it was important to be here today to represent my residents, and I hope you can all hear me clearly. I am County Councillor Gary Hutchinson, representing the Bourburn and the Coxall ward, which also includes the communities of Tursdale, Croxdale, Het, Parkhill, Kellow, Quartenhill, Cassop, Old Quarton, Garmondswear and Old Cassop and Cornforth. Why have I mentioned all of these? Because I believe all of these will be affected, and even more out of my ward. Today I speak on behalf of many residents who have contacted me about this application, particularly those living in Tursdale, the community closest to the proposed wind turbine. I know a number of those residents are here today, and I would like to thank them for taking the time to attend and participate in this planning process. Before I explain my concerns, I want to make one thing absolutely clear. I do support renewable energy. I also support businesses investing in reducing the carbon footprint. I have visited Amazon on numerous occasions over the years and have always been impressed by the operation. It's a major employer with my ward and provides jobs for many local people. Everyone I have spoken to who works there have spoken positively about the place of work, and I welcome Amazon's continued investment in our area. However, I also recognise the investment Amazon has already made in the rooftop solar panels. I understand these currently generate about 15% of the site's electricity requirements, and that this proposed turbine could actually provide another 85%, allowing the site to operate almost entirely on renewable electricity. That is a significant environmental ambition. It would reduce reliance on electricity from the natural grid, as Stephen's already said, and it's exactly the type of investment we should be encouraging for major employments. So let me be absolutely clear, I believe Amazon has the right ambition, but I also believe this is in the wrong location. Supporting renewable energy does not automatically mean supporting every proposal in every location. As the elected county councillor for these villages, I have a duty to represent the views of my residents, even where I recognise the wider benefits of a proposal. That is why I'm here today. Having carefully read the Planning Officer's report, and I do apologise if I'm repeating some of that, I believe the recommendation before the committee is the correct one to be refused. The report identifies 4 clear reasons for refusal, all based upon adopted planning policy. Once again, first, the impact upon the setting of Durham Cathedral and the World Heritage Site. I know Steve's already pointed out the height of the Amazon factory, but can I point out the Cathedral Tower at Durham is 218 feet. This turbine is 410 feet. The officer concludes that because of the turbine's height, scale, movement and visual prominence, it would harm the outstanding universal value and setting of one of the most important heritage assets in the world. The report concludes that the public benefits are not sufficient to outweigh the harm. Secondly, there is the impact upon the Durham City Conservation Area. Again, because of its height, visual prominence, the report concludes that the turbine would harm important views that contribute to Durham's unique historic character. Thirdly, there is the impact on the residential amenity. Whilst issues such as noise and shadow flicker can largely be controlled through planning conditions, the report concludes that the impact upon the residents of Cornforth Moor Farm Cottage would be overbearing and unacceptable. Something that was mentioned slightly in that report was also regarding stray aid, which is not that far away as well. Finally, there's an issue of the highway safety. The officer concludes that the proposal fails to meet the required separation distance from the A6888 as required under Policy 34 of the County Durham Plan. Chair, over the past few weeks I've spoken with many residents across my ward, emails, Facebook, etc., but particularly those living in Tersdale. Many do support renewable energy. Many appreciate what Amazon brings to our local economy. However, they have to consistently be told that this turbine is simply too big and too close to their village. We've already mentioned about it coming down on the A688. I believe originally it was going to be near to the Lameside line and was actually moved. Yes, it could have fell onto the Lameside line, but is that a different to falling onto a main road? They're concerned about its height, its dominance over the landscape, the impact on the character of the village, and whether this is simply the right place for the structure of this scale. Whether members agree with every concern or not, I believe those residents deserve to know that their voices have been heard today. Planning is about balance. It's about encouraging investment while protecting communities. It's about supporting renewable energy whilst respecting our internationally recognised heritage as well. It's about encouraging economic growth while ensuring developments comply with the planning policies that the Council has adopted. If we set those policies aside when they are clearly engaged, then we risk undermining confidence in the planning system. Chair, I genuinely believe Amazon ambitions are commendable. I hope they continue investing in renewable energy. I hope they continue to create jobs. But I also hope they will continue working with the Council and consider whether the same environmental benefits can be achieved in a location that causes less harm to nearby communities and our historic environment. Supporting renewable energy should never be abandoned in good planning. But finally, my residents expect me to be fair. Today, I believe being fair means recognising Amazon's ambition while standing up for communities I was elected to represent. For those reasons, I respectfully ask the committee to support the officer's recommendations and refuse this application. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Hutchins. Can I next ask Turnsdale resident Amy Plant to speak? Councillor, you have 5 minutes to talk, and please keep it to that. Thank you.
Good afternoon, I'm Amy. I'm a lifelong resident of Tersdale, and today I'm speaking on behalf of Tersdale Residents Association, our neighbours at Cornforth Moor Farm Cottage, and many residents from Coxall, Boburn and Het who oppose this application. In our preparations, many concerns were raised that 5 minutes wouldn't allow, such as the potential risks of turbine fire, of turbine fall, which both would be catastrophic at this proximity, of ice throw from blades and the casting of microscopic fiberglass particles, to name but a few. But we want to speak about the real human community, the family whose daily lives stand to be permanently and detrimentally affected by this proposal. This includes elderly neighbours, families living with serious illnesses, parents of autistic children, and our own family caring for a medically complex baby. These are real people whose homes, health and well-being deserve every bit as much consideration as the plethora of technical reports before you today. It's disappointing that neither Tersdale nor Conforthmoor Farm Cottage, the closest residential neighbours, were even invited to the applicant's own pre-application consultation event initially. In fact, throughout the process, many residents have felt excluded from a process that should have involved those most directly affected. We want you to understand what that means to us. The planning officer rightly recognised that Conforthmoor Farm Cottage would experience the greatest visual impact, and unlike many homes, there's absolutely no sheltered rear garden or alternative outlook. Every principal view from the property, both inside and out, would be dominated by a 125-metre moving structure. For us, our residence isn't just coordinates on a map, it's our home. Our gardens are where our children play, where we unwind after a long shift, and where we seek quiet enjoyment. The applicant's visual assessment attempted to reduce our living spaces to clinical technicalities, suggesting that because our gardens at Tersdale sit parallel to the site, we can simply look away or rely on seasonal trees and garden fences to hide a colossal 125-metre moving structure. Indeed, the applicant themselves determined the visual impact as, and I quote, major adverse. Additionally, although the applicant's noise assessment concludes that predicted noise levels are acceptable, it doesn't reflect the quietest nighttime conditions, when the background noise is at its lowest and turbine noise is likely to be most noticeable. Nor does it fully address residents' concerns about repetitive noise over prolonged periods. Their report measures sound in decibels but completely ignores the effects of low vibrational infrasound. For those of us living closest to the proposed turbine, this is not simply a technical debate. It's about our ability to sleep, to enjoy our homes, and to maintain our quality of life. These concerns are not hypothetical. They reflect the genuine lived experiences of reported by those who live near wind turbines, including one that's present today. Even where noise complies with technical standards, the persistent low-frequency hum can become a constant intrusion, creating ongoing stress and diminishing the peaceful enjoyment of people's homes. If you wish to understand the true impact of this proposal, I invite you to stand at Tersdale, at Conforthmoor Farm Cottage, or at any residence off Bourburn Way and imagine a 125-metre turbine this close to your own home. I ask you as people today who understand what home means, is that a fair or reasonable expectation for any family? There has to be a point at which enough is enough. Planning policy requires cumulative impacts to be assessed because communities should not be expected to absorb an endless succession of industrial developments. Existing developments should never become the justification for even more. We're not asking for special treatment, we're simply asking for the protection that planning policy already promises us. This application doesn't just fail the human test, it fails fundamental planning principles. The proposed turbine doesn't just fall slightly short of the recommended distance from homes set out in the County Durham plan, it's substantially closer. It would stand just 355 metres from the nearest home, less than half the 750 minimum benchmark separation distance. And as your planning officer has established, it breaches statutory highway safety topple distances, and it inflicts irreversible harm on our setting at the World Heritage Site, the pride of County Durham. Members of the committee, your planning officers carefully assessed this proposal and reached a clear recommendation. Whilst we understand that the report rightly focuses on vital heritage and highway safety concerns, I simply ask that alongside the technical evidence, you also remember the people whose families and homes and quality of life are at stake. So we warmly welcome the planning officer's clear recommendation to refuse the application, and we respectfully urge you to protect our community, uphold your officer's recommendation and refuse the application.
Thank you, Amy. Can I now invite Ben Parkins and Amy O'Callaghan to speak on behalf of the agent and Amazon? Please come and you have 5 minutes between you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon. My name is Ben Parkins. I work at TNEI and I'm representing Amazon as the agent today. This proposal gives Durham the opportunity to support a well-designed renewable energy scheme at an established employment site. While wind turbines are often a highly emotive subject, the question before the committee is whether this turbine would cause unacceptable planning harm. The evidence shows that it would not. The proposed turbine at Amazon's MME2 distribution centre would contribute to renewable energy generation and carbon reduction targets by helping to secure a sustainable energy supply, while also supporting a major employer in the area through the safeguarding of jobs and enabling future investment. Much common ground has been reached through the work of council officers and consultees. The remaining concerns are matters of planning judgment and balance, yet nothing would be unacceptably harmful to the city's heritage assets or to local residents to a degree that will prevent the grant of planning permission. I will take each of the proposed reasons in turn. First, in terms of heritage, Historic England's recently published guidance on commercial renewable energy and the historic environment is important as it recognises that the significant policy changes in favour of onshore wind require a pragmatic, consistent and proportionate approach. Heritage should not automatically be an obstacle to onshore wind. The turbine would be approximately 6.4 kilometres from Durham's World Heritage Site. That is well beyond the typical buffer zone of between 0.5 and 5 kilometres for non-landscape UNESCO sites. Durham's World Heritage Site has no buffer zone, with its draft management plan recognising setting as experiential, multisensory and fluid, and concluding there is no clear case for establishing a buffer zone as a result. The majority of the outstanding universal value of the World Heritage Site would remain owing to a combination of the built form and vegetation in the foreground of views out from the city. There is very limited potential for the proposed wind turbine to be seen in combination with the World Heritage Site. As a result, the turbine has no potential to adversely affect the setting of the World Heritage Site. It will present a neutral change with no potential to detract from the appreciation, understanding and experience of the World Heritage Site's aesthetic values. The same conclusion applies to the cathedral, castle and conservation area. Durham's most important views are predominantly experienced within the city itself. Any glimpse views of the turbine would be from a very small element of wider panoramas and would not alter key views, street scenes or the character of the conservation area. Where visible, it would be read within the context of existing large-scale development to the southeast of Durham rather than an isolated or incongruous feature. In terms of residential amenity, this has been carefully assessed as residents are entitled to a high standard of living conditions. The residential visual amenity assessment applies an established and objective methodology. Although the turbine would be prominent from parts of Cornforth Moor Farm Cottage, the existing Amazon building would remain the dominant feature in the view. The turbine would not be visible from all parts of the house or grounds and would not become an overwhelming or inescapably dominant presence. Planning is concerned with whether a change would be of such magnitude that property would effectively become an unacceptable place to live. The assessment concludes that this threshold is not reached. The proposal would change some views, but not to an extent that would justify refusal. In terms of public safety, this is paramount. There are no statutory minimum separation distances between wind turbines and roads. While Policy 34 raises the issue of topple distance, that must be considered in light of modern turbine design, engineering standards, and actual evidence of risk. Modern turbines are built to rigorous standards and are very safe. Comparable and larger turbines, including the highest one in England, have been approved elsewhere in the country in close proximity to public roads. Importantly, the Highways Authority has not objected. To conclude, this application is part of Amazon's long-term commitment to this important employment site. When the potential reasons for refusal are considered objectively, all of them involve questions of balance, with the evidence showing no unacceptable harm to heritage assets, residential amenity, or highway safety. When significant weight is attached to the benefits of renewable energy, then the result should be the grant of planning permission. For these reasons, I respectfully ask the committee to consider the proposal on its planning merits and grant planning permission. Thank you, Chair.
It's not me as well, that's fine. Thank you, Chair. There are a few points I'd like to pick up on some of the points made by speakers. The noise effects of the development have been fully taken into account by the submitted information as a start for our assessment and our experts' assessment of those. It's worth saying that there are some elements of concern to local residents, including what's called infrasound and low frequency sounds, which are clearly set out in the government guidance that don't form part of the planning assessment as part of a list of technical impacts excluded from development. So we are looking at the recently updated government advice on noise, particularly noise from wind turbines. And our officers, and John is here today, the principal from the environmental health team, to answer any technical questions you had, but those impacts can be mitigated by condition, but some of the other aspects that have been mentioned by objectors are specifically excluded from review by the government in terms of their advice of how local planning authorities assess these things. I think it's worth just mentioning in terms of Ben's comments as well, both for the residential amenity impacts and the effect on the heritage assets, the World Heritage Site and the conservation area, that whilst this is a distance away, as I said, there's two aspects of that which unfortunately count against that, and that's the kinetic, the moving element of this on a view across to Durham County, across the conservation area to the World Heritage Site, from Beacon Hill, from the Way sculpture, from the Battery in Wharton Park. This will be seen as something moving in the background of a dark skyline as a white element, and will have more of an effect because of that. And that's the reason why we accept all the guidance from English Heritage and the like. And as you'll know, we very rarely don't approve with the significant weight given to sustainability energy projects, but the effects on those highest level of assets and that moving element of this, and the fact that whilst I think Ben's just said there's no effects on the city centre, the images I showed you showed where the landscape team said the turbine would be visible. It depends on the extent of the tree line. The tree line is obviously more exposed in winter. It will grow, it will fail in parts, it'll be replaced, so this can maybe come and go, but effectively the information provided shows that we think the majority of at least one of the blades, if not potentially the hub on occasion, may be able to be seen across the conservation area. And in this background, as I said in my presentation, a background to the World Heritage Site, to the cathedral, the castle, which is largely undeveloped. It's a natural bowl which sets the extent of the conservation area, and it sets the setting of the World Heritage Site. And it's that moving element. I just wanted to reinforce with you that is what is the difference between the standard separations you'd expect from a World Heritage Site and what's proposed here. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Can I open up to questions from the members, please? Councillor Wilkes.
I've got two questions, Chair. One's for officers, one's for the applicant. Depending on what the officer says, I might just amend what I'm asking the applicant. So if I could just ask the officer first. You've shown us some pictures from the farmhouse of what this would look like. Why are there no pictures of what this will look like from the World Heritage Site or the conservation area? I'm struggling to believe that this will be visible from those locations.
Those are the pictures from the World Heritage Site?
No, what I'm seeing is a blue line which stands out compared to anything else. What I want to see is a white line which shows us what it will actually stand out and look like, because I'm not convinced as to the visual impact from the World Heritage Site. I am very convinced of the impact on the residents, by the way, and of the concerns about the road, which are the refusal reasons 3 and 4. But I'm just struggling to believe that we're going to see something in the distance, at that distance, and there doesn't seem to be anything that has been put up there to show that, just because it's not blue, and it's certainly not as big as that blue line, because something that's, 6 metres wide, 6 kilometres away, will not look that big.
I think you're misinterpreting the image. That shows, just as my red arrows showed where it would be in the landscape, the blue lines show where that would appear on the horizon. The slightly wider bit on some of the images shows the width of it. The fact that this can be seen potentially in the heritage landscape has been set out, and we're using the applicant's images there. I think it's acknowledged in their submission that there's a view of it. And our own landscape officers and conservation officers have also assessed the Y-line views of that in terms of it. But I'm showing you the information that's available on the file, but the long line down shows where the location it is. It's not supposed to be a representation of the turbine itself.
Thanks, Chair. I mean, I appreciate it's not meant to be that, but it would have been helpful if we'd have had something which showed what it would actually look like, because I'm not convinced on that side of things. more importantly, I've got a question for the applicant. It's a bit of a longer one, actually, because could we put up the picture of the actual Amazon depot, the last one that you had on, which is a bit more close up? The roof on the Amazon depot has between a quarter and a third of it covered in solar panels. And Amazon's got a car park with about 800 car parking spaces as well, but there's no solar carport on a single parking space to my knowledge. And as far as I'm aware, there's no battery storage currently installed at Amazon. Now that roof could probably supply another 7 megawatts of electric with solar. The carport's another couple of megawatts, and an area, some of you might have seen me measuring the front of here earlier on, but an area between a third and a half of the size of this floor space here could fit enough battery storage to provide more than the actual amount of energy that this turbine would produce. So, I mean, given that that's the case, given that Amazon can probably buy battery storage and solar panels cheaper than pretty much anyone on Earth, I mean, everything else that you can buy is cheaper than anywhere else, why do you need a 120-metre wind turbine when you've got a massive amount of potential solar generation on the rest of the roof, all of that car park for battery, to put solar carports on, and an enormous amount of space to pretty much as much battery storage as you like. We've got 4 gigawatts of offshore wind coming into County Durham, which you'll be able to buy for pennies compared to the rest of us. I mean, some people here can charge up their car for, what, 6-7 pence a unit. You'll be able to get this for 1p a unit. I just don't understand why you would need to do this with all those other opportunities. Instead of significantly impacting on loads of residents, you wouldn't have to impact on a single resident in County Durham.
Ben, would you like to come back on that one?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you, Councillor, for that question. My understanding is that even if you did put solar panels over the car parking area, it still wouldn't produce enough energy to satisfy the operations of the site. And because of that, that would also render the presence of a battery not needed.
Come back and check with the applicant then, because the amount of solar that you'd put on, both at the building and the car park, is more than what you would generate from the wind turbine. And what about the point that there's no battery storage being proposed?
Sorry, do you mind repeating that question?
Basically, we're told it's what, 1.85 megawatts for this wind turbine, but you can fit another 7 megawatts minimum on the roof and several more megawatts in the car parking area, and you can put in battery storage as well. I'm just trying to understand why you've not considered those as alternatives, given that that's the case.
Yeah, no, good question. The technical experts behind it have decided that a wind turbine would be the best way to satisfy the operational needs of the distribution centre.
Mr. Chair, I'll politely disagree.
Yeah, not a problem. I think Steve's going to come back to that as well, Councillor Wilkes.
If I could just have a slight side point. The applicant did have approval for the solar panel across the whole of the roof. You'll have noticed from the images that it's only on part of the roof at the moment, and they had to amend that scheme because the loading of the roof wouldn't take all that. So I don't think they've implemented all of what they could do on the roof there, but there is a capacity to the roof that has stopped them building solar panels across all of it. Just to clarify that. Thank you.
Councillor Bell?
Yeah, just a quick one for Steve. Steve, I couldn't see in the report or on your diagram the circumference of the blades. What size? They look more than half the size of the column. Is that correct?
82 metres, but sorry, the batteries run out. I'll come across to it. Yes.
Steve, with the noise report and everything like that, is there any part of that what can go into the planning considerations or not?
Like I said, there's two elements of the noise complaints that we can't in terms of the infrasound and the low frequency sound. But if I could pass over to John Hayes, who's the expert on this in terms of the noise. Noise reports have been submitted, they've been discussed in detail, and you know we look at the objections as we go through to try and address the specifics of those for our responses. But we're confident that those can be addressed by condition. But if I may pass over to John, please.
Hi, Chair. Yeah, the noise report that's been submitted shows that noise wouldn't be a consideration for refusal. The background levels in that area are fairly high because of the road network anyway. When they've done the assessment, the levels have come in less than the background noise levels, but there's still proposed conditions that we would agree with to be applied in terms of a wind turbine. We do consider low frequency sound in relation to frequency modulation. That's something that we asked to be considered. Given previous turbines going back 20 odd years ago, Durham had quite a significant experience with wind turbines. Those considerations have been considered by the applicant. Therefore, we couldn't really refuse on grounds of noise.
Just on that one, I'll come back to you. Yeah. That yard is closed quite a lot due to high winds. So the chance of that being running at high rotation very quickly, does that come into the noise report, or is it just a sound over an average amount of days or whatever?
Yeah, it's the standard that they follow is still a 1997 standard. It hasn't actually been updated yet. It is under review. Depending on the levels of wind, yes, they do look at it and they have assessments from different heights. There's all sorts of ways that it's considered. And wind speeds, but it's generally up to 10 metres per second. Once it goes over a certain wind speed, then the noise from the turbine itself, the noise from the wind takes over, if you like, that becomes the dominant sound. With the wind speed as well, wind turbines themselves have to be regulated. So if the wind is too powerful, the turbine itself will be shut down. So they have that in with that. It's a similar thing for the flicker assessment. They reduce it as well. So I think that it answers that.
No, the only reason I was asking for, if you go back to the map with the industrial estate, it looks like it's Zenith Trailers is about less than 100 metres away from the wind turbine. And that's quite a busy yard with a lot of people working in it. So I just wondered if that noise has been accounted for affecting them.
Yeah, I see what you mean. It has been, yes.
Any more questions from members? I think we're ready to go to the debate then. Councillor Schumann.
I must declare that I am ambivalent to renewable energy, but this has not affected my decision making in this case. I think the visual amenity, residential amenity, and heritage amenity trump the need for this wind turbine, because as Councillor Wilkes suggested, it's not only the roof that could bear solar panels, they could have solar carports as well. Therefore, I want to go with the officer's recommendation to refuse.
Councillor Wilkes.
You're going to think I'm mad. I'm going to mention Lego for a second. We've got a Lego thing coming into County Durham in the next few weeks. But I go to Legoland at Windsor quite regularly, which is quite close to Windsor Castle. Pretty important heritage asset. They've just covered half their car parks in solar ports. Yeah, because it's a location where you wouldn't want something to be overlooking Windsor Castle. I consider Durham to actually be more important than Windsor Castle because I live here. I look at this and I never want to turn down renewable energy unless the planning rules dictate that we should. I'm not 100% convinced on the impact from the World Heritage Site, but I'm willing to accept what officers say. More importantly, I'm willing to accept the impact on the local residents here. So I'm going to support the officer recommendations and look forward to Amazon bringing back a lovely carport covered in solar panels and battery storage so that they can turn that site net zero.
Councillor Bell.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, much to echo what Councillor Wilkes says here, but first of all, you've got to applaud Amazon for wanting to go down, you know, to be self-sufficient with their renewables. But as that's come out here, there is probably other ways to do it. And again, I'm not, you know, from the World Heritage Site, that wouldn't probably win me over. But what does win me over is the impact and the people who live around them, that area, the local residents. And I fully support the officer's recommendation for refusal if Mark's moved it, or Councillor Schumann, I would second it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I believe we're ready for a vote. So can I have all in favour of going with the officer's recommendation to refuse this application? That is unanimous, so the application is refused. Would you like another quick break to get some water or toilet? I would now like to ask Claire Teasdale to present planning application agenda item 5C.
Good afternoon. This is an application for the installation of a solar farm together with all associated works, equipment and necessary infrastructure, including battery storage. And this is land at the east and south and west of Benridge Farm, Philip Oak Lane, Blackhall Rocks. But before I do, I'd just like to give you a little bit of a general update regarding appeals. I can report that we've received 2 appeal decisions over the last few days for solar developments. These being the Harehill Farm at Haswell Plough, which was an application for a solar and a BESS, and then also a solar farm at Wagtail Lane at Craghead. These were reports which officers recommended approval and were refused by the Planning Committee. The Planning Inspectorate has allowed these at appeal, considering that the benefits of the solar and BESS developments outweigh the harm. That's just a general update because we are talking about solar and BESS, and it's just important that you are aware of these 2 decisions. As I say, we just got informed about yesterday. In terms of the site, it's located on land at Benridge Farm, which is located to the south of Blackhall Rocks and to the west of Heselden and High Heselden. The site itself comprises of 1 large agricultural field and 2 smaller fields defined by hedgerows. The site itself is bounded by agricultural land to the east, Hart to Haswell Railway path, which is also referred to as a countryside walkway, and a local wildlife site to the south. Actually, I'll just put the aerial on because you can perhaps see this a little bit clearer. To the north is the unclassified Philip Oak Lane, which is just along here. As I said, the Hart to Haswell Railway path, which is again perhaps better to just see on here because you can see the vegetation associated with it. There's agricultural and woodland to the west, and also to the north of the lane is Tweddle Farm, which is a children's animal farm. The application site is described in paragraphs 11 to 21 of the officer report and highlights relevant features and designations. Of particular note is that there are 3 public rights of way that cross the site, 2 of which would require diverting to facilitate the development, but replacement routes would be provided. Also, there's a very small part of the land in the southeast corner of the site which lies within a designated area of higher landscape value, with the designation bordering the site to the south and continuing along the coast over 800 metres away to the east. The closest non-related properties, because this is Benridge Farm, who is the site owner, are residential properties at Tweddle Farm and Tweddle House, which are just along here. And they're approximately 20 metres to the north of the site, which is across the road of Philip Oak Lane. Between 48 to 80 metres south of the site are residential properties at Heselden Hall Cottage and the Grade 1 listed Heselden Hall, which is just down here. There are also residential properties approximately 400 metres to the west at High Heselden and 500 metres to the north of Blackhall Rocks. The proposal itself is set out in detail in paragraphs 22 to 44 of the officer report. The arrays of solar panels would be arranged in rows approximately 3.5 metres apart, allowing for boundary landscaping, perimeter fencing and access. The arrays themselves would be mounted on metal frames, with the panels having a maximum height of 3.1 metres. Equipment to support the generation of electricity would be located across the site, accessible by internal access tracks along with underground cabling. On site, a substation would be located in the northwest of the site, which is in this location here, and the battery storage element of the development would be co-located in the same area and would comprise of battery storage containers within which energy generated by the solar farm would be stored and released as and when required to the grid. The site would have perimeter security fencing with CCTV and maintenance access. There is a grid connection via a substation available close to the application site, and the proposed development would connect to the grid via an underground loop-in, loop-out connection into the existing 66 kV overhead line, approximately 1 kilometre to the west of the site. This is outside of the site boundary and would require a separate consent. Construction would take approximately 12 months, with the site then being operational for a 40-year period, following which the site would be decommissioned and restored. Planting is proposed to be undertaken, comprising native trees, orchard trees and hedgerow planting, including the infilling of existing hedge gaps to filter views and to provide biodiversity enhancement. I now have a few photographs of the site, and what this does is the top photograph, there's a series of 4 photographs. The top photograph shows the site without solar panels. The second photograph shows the site with the solar panels, and the third one shows the site with 15 years of growth of the landscape planting that's proposed. And this plan here, just beside it, again on all 4, shows the location of where the photograph's been taken and the direction that you're looking at when you're looking at these. So this first one is a view from footpath number 20 near Philip Oak Lane, looking south. And as I say, you can see the sort of the timeline that's happening there. This one is the view from public footpath number 20, again near Philip Oak Lane, but this time we're looking west. As you will see on these photographs, the planting, that's at 15 years growth. You can still see some of the solar panels through those. The next one is again a view from footpath, this one's a view from footpath number 18 looking northwest, and another one looking from footpath number 18 looking northeast. And basically it's the same pattern, solar panels, and then with the growth. In terms of access to the site, this would be off Philip Oak Lane, and it would use in part the access to Benridge Farm. Basically, you would come in at the existing access, and then there would just be a turn here, and it would go through those trees, and then that would access it onto the wider site. The access would require widening to accommodate the largest vehicles associated with the construction phases of the development. Also of importance is that access for the HGVs would be from the east. When we went on site this morning, we came in from the west, so travelling east, and it is a single lane route, but the bus did get a little bit stuck, sorry, when we were reversing out of the farm, but that's a different story. But the access for HGVs would be coming from the east along from Crimdon. In terms of consultations and representations that's been received, these are set out in detail in paragraphs 54 to 110 of the officer report, along with details of the publicity that's been undertaken. The majority of statutory and internal consultees do not object to the application, subject to conditions where appropriate. The exception being Monk Heselden Parish Council, who objects, as do Merton Parish Council and Seaham Town Council. The Council's landscape section identify harm to the character, quality and distinctiveness of the landscape, and this being major adverse initially in relation to the site in the immediate area, eventually reducing progressively to moderate adverse with the establishment of appropriate and sufficiently robust landscape mitigation. The moderate adverse effect level of impact would be around for the 15 years until that planting grows, and would also hold in winter months for the operational period. However, this site is considered to be visually well contained, and no harm is identified to the AHLV, which I described earlier. The number of representations received from the public are set out on the report and on this slide. A summary of the issues raised by objectors and supporters are included in the officer report, along with the representations being available in full to view online. Objections have been received from members of the public, East Durham Action Group, CPRE and Durham Bird Club have commented. Issues raised by objectors are summarised on the slide and include principle of the development, site safety, landscape visual impact, highway safety, public rights of way, but as I say, you can see on the slide the issues that's been raised. A local resident objecting to the scheme intends to address the committee today in person, so you'll be able to hear direct from them about their concerns. Councillor Croot, the local member for Blackholes and Heseldons, objects raising similar issues, but also including a lack of an ES, an environmental statement, priority to brownfield sites and council-owned land, lack of community benefit, loss of environment to community and tourism, the requirement for a bond for decommissioning, and that the development itself would not be net zero. Councillor Crook unfortunately has advised that he's on annual leave from today and so unfortunately is unable to attend the committee, where he was hoping to speak against the application on behalf of local residents. He's therefore asked that we explain this to you and also to refer to his written objections, and he wishes that his apologies are also noted. In terms of support, matters raised by local businesses, including the North East Chamber of Commerce and the site landowner, as well as local businesses, have raised issues of economic and social benefits, employment, improving North East energy resilience, strengthening supply chains, that the land is not being used for growing food, that it would put monies back into the farm, business rates to the council, and also a community benefit fund. I would like to say that the concerns raised by objectors as well have been considered in the report, in the officer report, as you'll be able to see. In summary, the development has been carefully assessed in terms of its location, operation and appearance, and the impacts of the development. Where harm has been identified, this has to be weighed in the planning balance, and in doing so, the benefits of renewable energy are fully recognised and acknowledged. Landscape and visual harm has been identified, and even with mitigation, but it's not considered that this would be unacceptable in the planning balance. And as stated previously, the site is considered to be visually well contained and no harm to the AHLV is identified. And I think that was something that when the members were on the site visit this morning, you could actually see the topography of the land. And I think, you know, you can appreciate that this site is different. Some harm to residential amenity is identified, but with conditions to mitigate any impact, it is considered that there would be an acceptable level of amenity. It's also recognised that there would be less than substantial harm to the setting of a designated heritage asset, but again, it's considered that the benefits of the scheme outweigh this harm. In addition, a loss of hedgerow, again, would be mitigated by additional planting, which again, we consider to be acceptable. A loss of enjoyment to the public right-of-way is also identified, but alternative routes are proposed, which again are considered to be acceptable. Taking all material considerations into account, including those raised by interested parties, there are no material considerations that indicate that the plan should not be followed. Therefore, the benefits of the scheme officers consider would outweigh the identified harms, and the application is therefore recommended for approval, subject to the conditions and section 106 as set out in the officer report.
Thank you, Claire. We have a number of speakers again on this application, and I'd like to invite resident Nikita Fellows to speak. You have 6 minutes due to the amount of objectors we've got to speak as well.
Thank you, Chair and members of the committee. My name is Nikita Garner. I apologise for the confusion, it's an old email address. And I live at Heseldon Hall Farm, which on the south boundary, as you can see there in red, it's immediately underneath that. It's the small cluster of houses. Unfortunately, Rob couldn't be here, so I'm speaking on behalf of the local residents from Heseldon, Monk Heseldon, High Heseldon and Blackhall, together with the Parish Council, the vast majority of whom are united in their objection to this application. We've heard a lot about renewable energy already today, But this is not an argument against the importance of renewable energy. It's about whether this development's appropriate. And let us be clear about what's being proposed. The terms solar farm and solar park attempt to soften a reality. What we're talking about is large-scale industrial development in the heart of the countryside, surrounded by homes and residents. Durham County Council has chosen to pursue county-wide net zero 5 years ahead of the national target. That ambition should not be pursued at the expense of things that make this site worth protecting. Well-used public footpaths and bridleways, coastal and rural views, fields used by lapwings, a red list species and other declining ground nesting farmland birds, and productive farmland. The landowner recently submitted a letter which confirms the land is now under an environmental management scheme. That does not make it unused. It was farmed for generations, and its current management is further evidence of its environmental value. These are not minor constraints to be addressed after a site's been selected. They're fundamental to deciding where development should be located. The Council's 2045 target does not turn an unsuitable site into a suitable one. Durham's own guidance identifies the characteristics of landscapes highly susceptible to solar development, and the Senior Planning Officer's report to this committee states that Benridge meets many of those. It would come to significant harm. We say approving it would run contrary to that guidance. Policy 10 of the Durham County Plan makes it clear that development in the countryside should be carefully justified and that previously developed land should be prioritised wherever possible. The applicant has failed to demonstrate why a scheme of this scale must be located on open agricultural land rather than brownfield sites, industrial land, commercial estates, or large-scale rooftop installations. Residents have repeatedly asked the simple question, why should productive countryside be sacrificed when alternative locations exist within County Durham that are far better suited to industrial-scale energy infrastructure? East Durham already makes an extraordinary contribution to national low-carbon generation, and at the head of this section, we've heard about how many applications are coming through for them. Hartlepool Nuclear Power Station can supply more than 2 million homes, and new reactors have recently been proposed there to extend its life. The Teesside offshore wind farms visible within the wider landscape too, alongside a large number of recent solar developments at Hulham, around the A19, Hart, Sheraton, and towards the Herworth Burn Road. I was born and bred in County Durham. It's where I grew up and it's where I live now. I can no longer drive for more than 30 seconds without another solar development coming into view. The concentration of them is steadily changing the landscape, heritage and character of the place where we grew up, and Benridge must be considered as part of that cumulative transformation, not just in isolation. Against that background, this application would place energy infrastructure across more than 60 hectares of prominent undulating farmland for 40 years. You can see the scale of it there, and you have seen this morning that it's an undulating field. The whole site is exposed and would be visible from almost every surrounding direction, including my home. Boundary planting cannot make this landscape capable of absorbing the scheme. Once its character's been lost, it can't be planted and screened back into existence with a hedge. For residents, this is not a view encountered occasionally or from one selected viewpoint. It's the landscape around our homes and our daily routes, and we have chosen to live in a country rural area. Keeping the footpaths technically open doesn't preserve their recreational value if panels, fencing and infrastructure replace the countryside around them, while screening blocks the views those paths currently provide. Residents would also face construction traffic, noise, disruption on local roads, followed by operational noise from industrial infrastructure close to their homes. This is a scheme promoted by a multinational developer, not one creating lasting local jobs for local people. The principal financial benefit, which is the driving factor behind this scheme, would be private, but the impacts would remain local and widespread. 40 years is a very long time. It's most of a working life, and for the children growing up here, their entire childhood and much of their adulthood. That's not preserving a working farm for future generations. The landowner no longer lives at the farm or even in the county, and his adult children will be retired before the proposed return to agricultural production, if that ever materialised. Ownership changes, policies change, and no one can say with any certainty what condition the land will be in. The renewable benefit and energy benefits do not outweigh the harm to this landscape, views, wildlife, footpaths, rural setting, or overcome the fundamental unsuitability. So on behalf of the local residents, I respectfully ask you to reject the recommendation and to refuse this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Nikita. Can I please now invite Tim Mockridge, Steve Farmer and Lucinda Bird to speak on behalf of supporters. Can I remind you, you have 2 minutes each. I don't know if you want to combine it all in one speak or do it separately. It's completely up to you.
Chair, members, good afternoon. My name is Tim Mockridge and I'm the Development Manager for the Benridge Energy Park. My speech today will be brief, as I believe it's more important that you hear from the farming family and the local businesses who support this project. The proposal will be built without subsidy. The site is on marginal farming land, currently fallow, and outside of the best and most versatile classification. This proposal will give a hard-working farming family a reliable, long-term, index-linked income, as we'll hear in more detail shortly. This project will bring up to £10 million of inward investment opportunities to the county, as we'll hear in a moment, plus around £200,000 a year in business rates that the council will be able to retain. There will also be a community benefit fund. The site would dramatically enhance biodiversity with a threefold increase in hedgerow ecological value. I would welcome the opportunity to answer any questions members may have, and I hope the members will accept the officer recommendation to approve. I will now yield the rest of my time to Lucinda, my colleague from the farming family, and to Steve Farmer, CEO of Alconex, who are just some of the people and businesses who will benefit from this investment. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair and members. My name's Steve Farmer, the CEO of Alconex, a leading independent connection provider based here in the North East. I'm speaking today in support of the Benbridge Solar Park due to the tangible and significant benefits it would bring to the wider County Durham economy, but also the specific benefits for Alconex. As Tim has pointed out, and as you may have seen in the briefing packs, this will provide 8.8 million of direct contracts which can be won by businesses in County Durham in the North East. For Alconex, there could be up to £4.3 million worth of contracts available if they were approved today. This level of investment is significant and represents a huge opportunity for Alconex. Not only would a contract of this side provide stability and certainty for Alconex, it would give me the opportunity to expand our apprenticeship programme and get more young people across the North East and County Durham into highly skilled, well-paid jobs. On the back of projects such as Benbridge, we also have plans to move to a larger facility, helping us grow our impact in the community and increase our support for the children's bed poverty charity ZARAC. This year, Alconex won the 2026 Best Society Award for partnership with ZARAC, which will co-locate at the new facility in the North East and store and deliver beds to local children living in bed poverty. Throughout the planning process, Reg and Grupatech have been consistent in their approach in looking to work with local businesses, and if approved, the site could make a huge impact for Alconex and other local suppliers, many of whom I know have registered their support for the project. For this reason, I would like to request members follow the recommendation of officers and approve this application. Thank you, Chair.
Dear Chair and members of the committee, Lucinda Bird here, Bird family member in favour of this unique solar panel application. The North East needs food and energy security. My family are not selling this land or taking it out of food production. A solar lease keeps it in our ownership for the duration of the scheme, with agreed decommissioning and full reinstatement to agriculture built into the terms. It converts land that currently earns fallow scheme payments into a fixed, reliable income that does not depend on subsidy. The solar farm will provide income to reinvest into farming, from our point of view. Underneath the panel umbrella, we have production of British lamb and UK wool for a full agri-environmental model. Because of the solar panels, the land will produce more food than it has ever done before, stocking around 500 grass-fed sheep, protected from dog attacks, and in turn improving soil health, benefiting local mart, butchers and the public. The application site is Grade 3B agricultural land currently held in Fallow Environmental Scheme, sitting below the best and most versatile threshold, and it is not currently growing food. I'm running the only wool mill in County Durham since the 1980s, cottage processing raw sheep's wool, shipping product to the UK and the world, even Australia via sea freight. The potential for its growth is massive right here in County Durham, with green energy, not fossil fuels, to expand. I ask the committee to weight the evidence on pressures facing a working farm below competitive scale, the reversible and time-limited nature of the change proposed, and the improvements this scheme brings to the land itself. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Claire, would you like to come back on that, please?
I fully appreciate the concerns that's been raised by residents, as well articulated just before. And, you know, the issues that have been raised in terms of, you know, alternative locations, better suited, you know, when we receive each application, we consider, you know, various issues related to particular development. And in terms of this particular site, as I highlighted before, we recognise that there would be some adverse impacts in terms of the development, even with some mitigation in terms of planting. However, because of this particular site and the shape of the topography, again, you know, this site is quite well contained in itself compared to, you know, some of the other ones as well that, you know, we've still recommended approval, but they've been sort of more visual, but we've considered that the benefits outweigh the harm. This one, as I say, it's sort of fairly unique in terms of its location and that topography. You've referred to the concern about cumulative. You know, we're well aware of the number of applications that we've received. It takes our time up. So I am well aware of the number of sites that are in the area, but I think there is also a difference between those which are actually permitted and those which are still in the planning system. And so, you know, each application, when we're considering them, you know, we'll have to consider the cumulative impacts. And that's something that we have done within the officer report. And based on the current applications that's been approved, it's not given us too much of it's not given us a concern. You know, other sites that would determine later on, you know, that, you know, our view may change. But I think, as I say, this particular site is very well contained. It's always also been said about the use of agricultural land. As the lady just said, you know, it is 3B. It's not best and most versatile land, and there's no sort of preclusion by government for us not to build on, you know, sort of land that isn't best and most versatile. In terms of construction traffic, again, you know, we took the members up this morning. They're well aware of the location of the site. They're well aware that Philpoke Lane is a single lane traffic. We came in from the west, so travelling east, but obviously the traffic management plan that's proposed is taking the traffic coming in from the east, and traffic management is also proposed. Another point to mention is that the construction phase of this development would be for 12 months, which would be when that impact could arise. And in terms of vehicle movements, 4 vehicle movements in, 4 vehicle movements out in terms of HGVs is what's proposed. And as I say, there would be traffic management to ensure that, you know, there's least, you know, disruption to local communities in terms of that. Again, I know you noted about harm doesn't outweigh. It is a planning balance. You know, we have identified harm here and we've been quite open about it. But again, we've sort of made a judgment as to which way we think the planning balance lies. We're well aware of government guidance, what the government's position is, and how applications should be determined, and we've done that in accordance with this. The other thing is, I think all the other issues are actually covered in the report that we've done. And obviously, you know, members have heard what the supporters said as well in terms of why they're wanting to enter into solar farms, but ultimately officers have made a recommendation highlighted the differences and why we think that this one should be approved, and it's now over to the members to make that decision.
Not really, no. Obviously, if you get asked a question that relates to what you want to bring back to, then you can. But if you're not asked a question, I'm sorry, you cannot. No, that's good. Sorry. Neil, would you like to say something?
Thank you, Chair. Just to pick up on one point that I heard in the speech from Mr Mockridge, and that was about a community fund. So again, it's just to remind members that that isn't something that weight can be afforded to in the determination of this application. It isn't CILREGS compliant. It isn't something that we're proposing to secure through a 106 obligation.
Can I open the floor to questions now? Councillor Teasdale.
Thank you. Right. I would just like, Chair, to note that I personally disagree with this solar farm, but I feel we're held by central government, and to appeal this would cost the council
Councillor Teasdale, is this a question or is it more to do with the debate?
What to do in the...
Okay, not a problem. Have we got any questions? Councillor Franklin.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I've heard about this, but it's more for traffic, this one. I understand that it's going to be from the east where the heavy good vehicles and that looks like traffic's going to be coming up. Have they took into account that Philpoke Lane on the coast road is a steep embankment and it'll slow any heavy good vehicles down? Also, across from on the coast road from the Philpoke Lane junction is a very busy holiday site that's a Parkdale resort, and you get a lot of people who are staying there crossing over to go up that exact route as well, which will probably affect traffic within that area and on the coast road.
Yes, aware of that. Obviously, within the report, it sets out what the highways can issue. Well, sorry, the highways response is, and they don't have an issue, subject to an appropriate construction traffic management plan. The construction management traffic plan, as I've said, you know, has the route which you've just identified where it goes through. But as I did say, there would be traffic management that would be put on this to inform people, to make them aware. It would probably involve signs. There may be a banksman, but there would be signage to ensure that people would be aware of the situation. And plus, bringing it back to what I said about vehicle movements, what we've been told is that it would be 4 HGVs in per day and 4 out, so 8 a day in total. And that would just be for the construction period.
Councillor Wilkes.
Thanks, Chair. I've got a couple of questions for officers and then one for either the applicant or the agent. I'm just trying to understand, because I don't really get the feel from the report as to what officers' views are in relation to the impact on the coastline, and particularly the heritage coastline and the walks along there. And is it actually visible if you're walking along the coastline? I don't feel that I've got an answer to that, and I can't see the report. If it's there, I apologise for that. The second question I've got for officers is about cumulative impact, because we know that there's quite a few different solar farms in this part of the county and over the boundary as well. How many more do we need to see before we say the cumulative impact is now such that we wouldn't recommend, as in officers wouldn't recommend any more for approval? I mean, is it 1, 2, 5, 10? Because each of these sites is a lot of land, but at the same time I appreciate that we need renewable energy, we need farms to be sustainable as well. So I'm just trying to understand from those 2 points of view about the coastline and the cumulative impact.
The impact on the heritage coast is referred to within the officer report. In paragraph 163 of the report. And so what we've identified there is that the heritage coast lies approximately 800 metres to the east of their site, and the landscape section has considered the proposal in terms of the heritage coast. And what they've said is due to the existing ridge to the east of Benridge Farm, the site and development would not be intervisible with the heritage coast, and therefore it's considered that views along and over the area designated as heritage coast would not be adversely affected by the proposed development. We do have our landscape officer as well, who's here today if you want to know anything further. But as I say, I'd refer you to paragraph 163 of the report on the heritage coast. I think the difference as well, if you're thinking back as well to the previous planning committee where we had CM, I think you can see the difference on a plan. I mean, that was sort of immediately adjacent to the heritage coast. Therefore, we did think that that one, in recommending refusal, you know, would have had an adverse impact on that setting. But we do not, as I say, because of the distance and the intervening topography, etc., we don't think that there would be impact on the heritage coast. Your other cumulative impact, how many more? Well, we didn't approve the last one. And I think it's, you know, going back to each one on its merits and considering cumulative issues as we go along as well.
Chair, if I could just come back on those points, because I guess what I was trying to understand is, if you're walking along that coastline there, I've walked it myself, can you see this solar farm when it's been constructed from the coastline or not? It doesn't really say yes or no in paragraph 163. It just kind of suggests that the overall impact on the heritage coast is not so great as, for example, what you've mentioned about the other site.
Just answer the question on that. From our understanding, looking at the submitted information, you would not be able to see the edge of the development. I would accept that you would see the four vehicles going up, you know, the haulage vehicles going up Philpoke Lane, but the edge of the development would be on the other side. So it was there weren't any photo montages submitted for that to show that in the assessment. But we have made the conclusion that it's not indivisible from site visits that we made.
Thanks, that answers that one, Chair. The question I had for the agent or the applicant was more related to grazing, because it is fantastic to see that we've got a farm that's actually producing wool in County Durham. I don't know how anybody can manage to manage as a farmer at the moment with the way we've got all of these subsidies being removed and the like. But I'm trying to understand, because we're told that there's a significant biodiversity improvement with this site. We're then told that it will also be grazed. I'm just trying to understand what the impact of the grazing will be on the biodiversity.
Hi, yeah. It's a question of timing. So during the spring period, when you've got various different grasses and wildflower seeds, etc., in there, they can grow, and then once you come over the time when the flowers have flowered and you've got the diversity impact from that, then you can let the sheep go into the fields after that, and so you can get the benefit of both.
And to be clear, that the sheep don't go and damage anything in there, so which means that you end up not being able to do it.
Correct. You don't want to put cows in there because they're kind of bigger and heavier and they can lean on things and break things, but sheep are absolutely fine, and it's common practice across many solar parks.
Councillor Bell.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's just more of the wider sort of picture on all of this. Claire, it was a question to yourself in relation to going forward. You know, like it's like free for all the way these applications are coming in, and as you kindly reminded us, we had a one overturned again sort of yesterday, as well as a battery storage unit. Was free for all, and you know, they keep coming in and coming in. Going forward for the Durham plan, is there a plan to allocate these sites?
the County Durham plan is, you know, something that's going to take a little while to get into play, but obviously we've got applications on our books that we will be determining, hopefully, well, this side of Christmas.
Okay, thank you, Chair. And just as a little question in relation to Councillor Wilkes, I know from the site visit this morning you could see the coast. So I don't know how if it works the other way. If you stand down at the coast, if you could see the side, but you certainly could see the coast from the side.
Councillor Hills, do you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Chair. It's just coming back to a point that Councillor Wilkes made. Now, Grupo Tech Solar UK 8 Limited, I presume that there's a Grupo Tech Solar UK 1 to 8 Limited, and probably 9 going the other way. When are we going to reach a saturation point when we don't really need any more? I don't know whether it's appropriate to bring this up now, but is that in our plans anywhere?
I think you're just asking what Councillor Bell had said, but perhaps in just a different way in terms of the cumulative impacts. That's something that, you know, as I say, we'll sort of got these applications on our books, we'll consider each on its merits. Obviously, cumulative will be something that we'll consider. If we consider it's an issue, we'll be highlighting that. And then, as I say, sort of going forward in the plan, you know, that's something that obviously we'll put forward to our colleagues that, you know, we'll perhaps come back. Actually, the next committee that we've got, the renewable, will have an update in terms of the County Durham plan on that matter.
Thank you.
Councillor Wilkes.
I've just got one last thing, Chair, which is I just want to double check something. So the land here, is the land owned by the farmer, or is there a separate landowner other than the people farming the farm?
Would one of the applicants mind answering that, please?
Yeah, it belongs to the farming family.
I think we're ready to move it on to debate. I think personally, my views, I don't know how other members feel. I feel we're in a bit of a rock and a hard place at the minute. We've just heard we've had 2 appeals done by government. So we're fighting that as well. But also, I think as subsidies are getting removed from farmers, as Councillor Wilkes has said, we're going to start seeing more and more farmers moving this way to get applications. So I think we are really at the minute as a committee quite stumped in a rock and a hard place on where we go with these at the minute, thanks to what central government are doing to our decisions in County Durham. Councillor Sherman.
I have already stated my ambivalence towards solar or renewable energy, but we are stuck with it. This site is, I wouldn't say it's ideal for a solar farm or solar park or however you want to dress it up, but it is the best site I've seen that has the least impact on the environment. Therefore, I recommend, well, I wish to go with the officer's recommendation.
Councillor Teasdale, do you want to say what you were going to say earlier when we were doing questions, or are you happy?
Thank you, Chair. I just would like it noted that I personally disagree with this solar farm. But like you mentioned earlier, we're held by central government, and to appeal this would cost the council taxpayer in millions, you're talking. And I would just like to make that clear. I do personally disagree, but like you said, I feel stuck with the decision.
Councillor Wilkes.
Right. The reality is, the reason it's here is because we do have the choice to vote whichever way we want on this based upon what the planning merits and demerits are. One of the ones that the officer referred to, which ended up at appeal, was one that I actually voted in favour of and actually told everybody at the time this will end up going to appeal and being passed. But I actually find myself rather bizarrely agreeing with Councillor Shulman here in relation to a solar farm, because given, and we've not reached the cumulative impact level that would allow us to consider not supporting this application. I would say we are getting close in some places. But this is going to benefit a family that can keep farming. It's not impacting, compared to what I've seen before, to any great extent compared to what we've seen in other parts of the county, like certainly up at Burnmore. I'm happy to second Councillor Shulman's proposal for approval, Chair.
Councillor Bell.
Thank you, Chair. Burnhope it was, Mark. Yeah, I'm definitely between a rock and a hard place, and you know, we sort of the central government policies, you know, put the officers on the spot with these, and Claire's absolutely fantastic long sort of report there, sort of like great work in it. However, at the end of the day, you know, for me, you know, I'll be a hypocrite to say anything else. You know, it's taking away this agricultural land and you know, and covering them in glass sort of for 40 years, and there's no doubt about it, it was the most beautiful area where these solar panels were, and I couldn't bring myself to vote for it. But I do get it as regarding the appeals, what we're losing and that now. You know, I respect whatever, you know, what colleagues are saying here in the report of the case officer, but I'll be, if it's going for approval, I'll be abstaining from this. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Franklin.
Chair, I want to speak before it goes to a vote. Being from Peterlee, I know the area well, and I feel sorry for the people of Heselden, Blackhall, Treadle Farm probably suffer from it. And then to the south of it, you've got the Heart of Hassel walkway, which I'd recommend people to go along and do. Beautiful area in the country, and I think that's going to have effect from this now.
As we have a first and seconder to go with officer's recommendation to approve this application, I'd like to take it to a vote. Can I have all in favour, please? Anyone against? Any abstained? Abstentions? So that application is now approved. Thank you very much for today. Could we please make sure everything's quiet while the IT turns off YouTube?